Alright, looks like I am live. Hello, people. So I'm about 30 seconds late. That's not so bad. I was sitting here ready for about 10 minutes, and then I was just kind of looking through messages and things and lost track of time, and then I noticed I had 1 minute to get it live, but hopefully anyone can hear me. Not sure who else is in there. This stream I think I'm gonna have to do... Oh, I just realized I pushed to talk on, but I think people can hear me anyway. Yeah. All right. But I was just saying, I think today is going to be a little bit shorter. It's a little bit of a busy day. I think partly it's not directly Super Bowl related, but I think that it's probably indirectly just kind of shifting a lot of plans around. But anyway. So, I have a few brief items here that are kind of fun to discuss. Let's see, one viewer though, I wonder if I should wait. I wonder how long I can durdle. I did not finish any videos this week, but I did work on a script a little bit. This week I wouldn't describe myself as a particularly busy person. I've actually been a little bit not busy this last year, which I think many people can relate to. So, because of that, I got a little bit more busy last week and kind of lost track of my time, which is I'm pretty thankful for. I'm going to be gradually getting more busy over time. Okay. Here's something I found that's pretty funny that my friend shared with me this morning. I'll go ahead and put it on the screen here. Boop. So it's from Reddit, from ⴅᴀᴇᴍ. So I'm going to read this story, and let me know if you think this definitely happened, if it is inspiring. It certainly got a lot of reactions. It's been up for 15 hours, so I guess this is one that's actually new. Alright, it says, if you have a child with my son in the future, we will not love them the same way we love our grandchildren because they will be half black. Now, this is a quote that she claims that her, the parents of her significant other, her boyfriend, said to her over dinner. So let's go ahead and get the context on that. Let's get the, what is it the kids say, the hot goss? People still saying that? Anyway. Today I took my significant other and his parents out to eat for the first time. We've been dating for over a year and have put off meeting his parents because they're racist. That statement above was dropped in the middle of dinner, unprompted. Before that little comments were said. Okay. Don't worry, Korobora. That's her username, Korobora. We'll pay since this is a pretty expensive place, and you probably didn't know. Okay, man, I picked it out, and I invited you. She's thinking to herself, right? What happened to that last girl you were dating? Her name was Megan. Oh, she was such a lady. She was so sweet, and her hair was so gorgeous and tame. Megan is now a Michael and transitioned F to M. Okay, so you don't like my natural wild afro. Food arrives, and I ask for a bottle of wine and a slice of my SO favorite dessert. Oh, my boyfriend's favorite dessert to be brought to the table because my nerves need it for faking it through this, and he was showing amazing restraint. I purposefully told my significant other to be calm before dinner and let them run the show to see how they'll be. We talked about if it went sideways, that this is blah blah blah. So this is just she's explaining why, she's justifying why her man isn't speaking up to make her story make more sense. I mean, to tell the truth, because that's what happened. She says, I don't think it's wise to order that wine, and he doesn't need that cake. Well, it ain't for you, and he loves that cake, so he gets cake. It's just ridiculous. My significant other brings up a wedding we attended via Zoom to lighten the mood, and they made a face, and our waiter came back with that wine at the right time, and cake slice. Blah, blah. Then it talks about, okay, it's just this slight turned into wine, and then they say, if you have a child with my son in the future, we will not love them as much as we love our other grandchildren because they'll be half black. If marriage is in your cards with him, forget it. I hope it doesn't last. We just believe that he would be happier with someone of a lighter skin tone. The only way I would believe this story is if like his parents are incredibly red pilled. I've been trying to reach you about your car extended warranty. Oh, is that you? Has that been you all along? Or is that an ad on the screen? Eki, can you hear me okay? You should let me know. Okay. But yeah, so this definitely happened. It's so long. Let's see. For your son and I to even be in your presence is so offensive, having dinner with racist. I cannot believe I thought you could be civil like a normal human being. I won't make that mistake again, neither will he. I can't believe I wasted 2 hours of my time on you both and made an effort to meet you, while I could have instead treated us both to a much better dinner with company who is far superior and forward-thinking than you two. I picked this restaurant for a reason. It's expensive as fuck, and I had saved for this night because I had intended on paying because it's where we had our first lunch date, and it also has that raspberry dessert that my significant other loves, and I mainly wanted him to have that comfort tonight. She's so selfless and thoughtful. Since you so graciously offered to pay, enjoy the bill and tip our black server the amount you would have tipped a Caucasian one, because I now believe that your racism will play a part in how you tip him. She states that twice because I guess the first part the implication wasn't clear enough. Okay. I said this loudly, and people turned their heads to look. His parents got red-faced, but I picked up the plate of cake and turned and walked to the door where my man was standing. I felt powerful. I felt confident. I felt extremely angry. I grabbed his hand, and right when I walked out the door and it closed, my legs shook, my breathing sped up, and I clung to him. We leaned on each other for support as we left and pulled off a few miles down the road to let him have a moment to gather himself. It's just ridiculous. Okay. Anyway, talks about how she returned the plate later. The comments are very supportive too. But what did you guys think? Right, totally happened. Then everyone clapped. And then everyone clapped. All the pieces of cake she walked out with clapped. Oh, there was a part I kind of skipped over. So when the black server comes over with the wine, right? He pours just a tiny bit of it before everything pops off. So then that was like, now they have to pay for the bottle of wine. Oh, sounds like I have company.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going? Oh, I'm sorry, I have to use push to talk. You know what? You could probably listen to the stream. Oh no, there'd be a delay. That would be terrible. Okay, I found my push to talk key.
Yeah.
It's just annoying because there's no good options for the. I bitch about this every week. I don't know, but you know what I mean? There's no good push to talk options that are not keys that are also registered on the keyboard. And it's really annoying because that means you have to always check that you're not in a text box. And I don't know how people do it. I think I'm just going to not use it and see what happens. Anyway, I feel better now.
So what's the risk that you're trying to mitigate that you think's difficult?
There's no good key to choose for push to talk because all of them are characters on a keyboard. Everyone. Like the Finn key would have been perfect, and Fleegan was explaining to me how no, like the way that keyboards are programmed, the Finn key like isn't on the same thing, so it does like some weird reason, right? And I'm sitting here like a retard, like, well, Shift works and Control works and Alt works, but
Well, it's not a big deal if you even do if you are on a text box as long as you don't hit enter. Sometimes that would happen with me. I used to just have S or X as the push to talk keys.
yeah, so
Because I'm
occasionally everyone thinks you're a snake, but then you have to
yeah,
delete all the S's, so right? So you don't.
yeah.
It's still awful. It's still clunky.
Because I'm looking at Discord now, and like if I hang on, let me see. No, it doesn't work. See, sometimes it's weird because sometimes if I just press my mouse down just in the middle of the page, in the middle of the chat, nowhere in particular, and then that makes the cursor disappear from the text box. And then if I had push to talk on, sometimes I would press S and nothing would happen. There would be no long string of the letter S coming out in the text box because sometimes it wouldn't switch on. The cursor wasn't switched on, but then sometimes randomly it would, and I ended up, holding down S for 10 minutes or something when I was speaking, and the whole screen filled up, and it was yeah, silly.
Paulo in the chat has a good idea. He says he uses a button on his mouse because you can just program that to anything. I should do that because I have there's two buttons on my mouse and presumably it's for volume, but I don't
So
know who needs that. Who needs like maybe or maybe it's page up, page down. I never use them because I don't know. I get never
what's
got the
wrong
habit.
with using the voice activated option? I mean, that's what I'm using now.
Probably nothing. I'm just gonna switch that. But anyway, did you hear any of the hilarious story that I read through from the Reddit thing? It's the last thing I posted in the Discord, and it's very funny.
Um,
I mean, it's
from
horrific.
the
It's a horrific example of real racism that definitely happened, and it's a scourge.
Oh, I see. From Reddit.
It's outrageous.
Yeah. And what's it? Tinder one night stand. I didn't think that looked interesting. Looks pretty basic and tabloid, but I'm guessing because you posted it, there's some element to the story that's a bit unusual.
Well, I meant the one
Oh.
below it, the two X chromosomes ones. If you have a child with my son, it's this
Yeah,
fake story about this black woman going to dinner with her, I guess, white boyfriend, and how racist the parents were to her.
I was skimming it. Wasn't there something about like transsexuality or something in there as well?
Yep, she snuck it in there. It's very tightly edited. So the ex girlfriend she mentions by this is in her head. She doesn't say it out loud, right? But for the benefit of the readers, she lets them know that that person is now trans. So that means that the parents not only are they racist, but they're dead naming a trans person.
Yeah, this is not real, and it makes me seriously reconsider trying to infiltrate the civil service. Of course, now that I've said that, I can't do it because it'll be on record now, and GHQ are no doubt listening. But it's like there are probably feds who are paid to write shit like this and put it on the internet. Like, I honestly wouldn't be very surprised. And if that is the case, I don't know what function it would serve exactly. But if that is the case, that honestly sounds like fun. Like, if it's possible to make a living from writing this kind of inane shit, I can see why people are attracted to it, especially people with well, like arty personalities, which isn't me really, but it does seem to be true of a lot of animated leftists, whatever else you might think of them.
Yeah, well, honestly, I'm thinking of just identifying as a feminist now. I'm not going to change any of my views, but I'm just going to switch the label. And then I'm going to go to the feminists, and instead it's going to be from the angle of like my feminism's the real feminism as a feminist. It's going to be my
Yeah,
hello fellow feminists approach, which is probably going to be about as ineffective as most of my other approaches, but it's kind of fun.
yeah. I've grown a bit unaccustomed to speaking off the cuff just because I've been reading from script so much recently because I wanted to enumerate complex ideas. So it's going to be interesting to get back into the swing of this. It is like I get more nervous when I'm speaking off the cuff, but it gives the conversation a nice sort of venturesome, perambulating quality to it. It's not so staid when you're just reading everything from a prompt. And yeah, it keeps you on your toes because you have to think of what to say next quickly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and honestly, everyone's their own harshest critic. I keep using the push to talk button and lagging my OBS even though I don't need it. God,
Yeah.
old habits. Not even new habits. Oof. Okay. Yeah, so but yeah, regarding that other article, the Tinder date thing, it is actually pretty outrageous, but mostly just silly. Just the all the shit she does, right? It's not just like a Me Too thing. It's like an absolute like circus followed by a Me Too. And this was published just like about a week or so ago, so I figured it's timely and outrageous. But overall, it is a little bit. I'm not sure what we're gonna take from it besides the outrage. But yeah, this was the
Yeah.
Tinder one night stand that turned into a nightmare. My date pretended to be pregnant, wore a fake baby bump, and lied about me being a deadbeat dad before faking a miscarriage. And that's like it's like a Mortal Kombat like combo. That's like
Could
a
you
that's like a stun lock combo of just a histrionic like gymnastics. Yeah, so
could
this
you
was yeah,
could
I'll
you
repeat it.
repeat or summarize that? Okay.
I will repeat it. Yeah. So this was a Tinder one night stand, right? So Tinder hookup. They go on a date first, right? She pretended to be pregnant, wore a fake baby bump, and lied about him being a deadbeat dad before faking a miscarriage.
Wow.
Now
Yeah.
I think it was. I think there was a Me Too at the end. I guess I'm just gonna skim it a little bit to see what else. Um, yeah.
I'm just doing a face in LMS, I guess. I'm trying to gauge this guy's looks level. I was gonna make some comment to the effect that, well, with his looks level, he shouldn't have been surprised that he ended up with a lunatic on Tinder, because women on Tinder generally want top quality males in terms of, well, just in terms of looks, obviously. And if you fall short of that, then the women that you're getting, if anything, are going to be those with, well, personality disorders, like it sounds she has, for instance. But he actually looks, again, very difficult to tell from that picture. Maybe like a 6.
I feel like he's a six on a bad day, right?
Mm.
Um, well, the other thing too though, he looks a lot older than he is because he's
Yes.
30 now. He looks a lot older than 30.
Yeah.
But this might just. But then also sometimes people kind of just like peak at an age and then they just look that age forever. I don't know, but
Yeah.
let me see. Yeah, she goes into what the baby's name would have been and everything. Um, I'm just looking at it and it's really just I guess this was a long drawn out thing. And then the woman Jacqueline McGowan was 36 and pleaded guilty. Let's see, to a course of conduct which caused fear and alarm. Is that a charge? Like, that seems it's an awful cumbersome wording. Or maybe that's like an essential element of things they're considering charging her or something. I don't know. I can only kind of guess. I don't really know anything about the law.
Didn't you
Um,
study it for a while?
no, when I was in undergraduate, I was in mock trial. That's the most law I
Yeah.
know. So I know a really particular set of things. Like you become pretty familiar with a lot of rules of evidence for like American trial stuff, but uh, yeah, and you learn a little bit of how like the procedures and the pomp and circumstance of courtrooms work and stuff. And it's kind of useful because you get an idea for what kinds of things people are able to like say under oath and put into evidence and stuff. But mostly I just did it for fun. It was a fun game.
Yeah. Sounds like it. I know someone who did mock trial as well. I think he was around the same age you were. But yeah, it's interesting. Sorry, what was so how was that related to the article? You
Oh no, I was sorry. I was just rambling because I was trying to figure out if that was a charge or not, and then yeah. So it's not really
okay.
related. Yeah,
Some people, I
so I
mean,
guess this
it's
is this is the woman, which I don't know. Phantom
difficult to tell.
pregnancy. Ooh, and
Yeah, I
she
can
called his
see.
parents too. She called his parents who live over in Malta.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I wonder if there's any particular reason why they've chosen that picture of him, which looks very professionally done, and it looks like, well, he's not wearing a mask. Looks like it might have been I was gonna say before COVID, but of course that's ridiculous. There's no way to tell that. It must have been like around the time of the trial and whatever. Whereas she has this grainy photo that it looks like it was just taken by a stranger almost on their phone in public, and she's wearing a mask. Just weird, like the discrepancy.
I don't know. I think they probably just tried to find two photos that were like lengthwise and kind of similar-ish. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
but
think they're
they'd think,
overthinking it.
yeah, I know, but I'm not trying to read any massive amount of meaning into it. It's just, it's weird that they managed to find a photo of him that looks very professional, and she's got that.
Wonder who took this photo too.
It says in the bottom left, Perthshire Picture Agency, which is a company, I would assume.
Oh, I just see this Gordon Curry thing.
It's the copyright in the bottom left of the photo.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is a pretty low quality photo. Like it's weird that it's copyrighted too. I don't get it. Or maybe it's from a security camera.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense. But anyway, so I guess her sister was pregnant, and maybe she was jealous that she wasn't also pregnant. They mentioned this baby Noah. Then I think, oh, did she actually have a miscarriage? And now she's like reenacting it because you could kind of see that logic, right? But I don't even think that's it. But they do characterize this as an unusual form of grieving. Wait, on Jamie's part? Oh, yeah, because okay, so they had chatted for a while, right? And like she had sent pictures and said, "Hey, this baby's real." And he, like he also thought it was real for a while, right? Because she was faking for so long. So I guess that would be
Yeah.
pretty traumatic, and you think it's all real, and then like how weird would it feel to like realize it was just a big hoax all along? I guess the only way to really take much away from the stories like this, besides just the basic underlying theme of bitches be crazy, um, would be to follow up and figure out like what they're actually charged with and how the sentencing goes, right? Because that's going to be the most obvious thing to draw out that double standard, and it's practically guaranteed. But I guess I'll see if I remember later. Maybe are there news stations that make that easy where you kind of like save a story and then it knows that if it's later going to report anything about it, it lets you know because you were following the story. I feel like that's a really like that feels obvious, you know what I mean?
What you mean, like a newsletter kind of thing that you sign up
Oh,
to?
I guess that is like a newsletter. I guess that is kind of exactly what that is.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not that redundant. Like it would be particular to like a specific story, not just like a general series of topics. Because I get those emails from like Gab, like from their newsletters, and I don't know. I'll peruse through what they have there, but it all just I don't know, like even if it's outrageous, it seems boring when they send it to me. And like some other sources are weird. I don't know. That's
Yeah.
There's also this Azalea Banks story where she dug up her dead cat named Lucifer and cooked it on Instagram. This is a little bit old. I don't know if we mentioned this last week or not. But it's still like not even the most crazy thing she's done. I know you kind of have a hot take on animal rights.
Really?
Don't you? I think you like don't really care if people kill animals so much. I mean, it's kind of consistent, right? Like
It's
it's just for me when
rather
it's
com.
when it's a cat or a dog, like it's just very different. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, a lot of people feel that way. How did that relate back to the article? It's
Well,
like,
just because the story is about how she dug up her dead cat, I guess she boiled it, in a pot.
yeah.
It's like cat desecration. My dear kitty, thank you for everything. A legend, an icon, forever a serval service. What is serval? Oh, cat breed. I did not know that. Did
I
you
mean,
know that?
just what
Uh,
serval?
yeah, the cat breed.
That it's what about it?
Just I didn't know that was a word.
Oh,
I'm just retarded. That's my word of the
is
day, I
it?
guess.
How's it spelled? CRVAL.
Serval. Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Oh, and then she has the cat's skull inside there with her booze and some peacock feathers. This looks like some voodoo shit.
Yeah.
Hmm.
A position on animal rights. Now that you mention it, it's like it's unusual, but it has like a consistent logic to it. So I basically agree with all of the ethical arguments for veganism. That is, I don't think that just by virtue of I don't think you can consider animals to be in a completely different ethical category and to have completely different rules applied to them just because they don't belong to the species Homo sapiens. There's this that guy Ask Yourself, this vegan YouTuber, has this long-running argument with people about name the trait, i.e., what's true of an animal, which, if true of humans, would make it justifiable to eat them, um, to endorse cannibalism, basically. And nobody's ever really been able to come up with a consistent answer to that. But having said that, I also think it's a waste of time to promote veganism because I think veganism is something that's only suited to a very particular kinds of personalities. I mean, it would be one thing if you could, show the entire population of the Earth some kind of a presentation on animal cruelty or factory farming or whatever it might be. But since that's not happening, it's not happening. And we know that there are genetic correlates with, say, the prevalence of vegan restaurants in a certain area. I've shown you those maps of the United States where the number of vegan restaurants per million people is charted across with the amount of English ancestry. So meat eaters obviously aren't going away. Humans have evolved to eat meat. So I think the way forward is to promote cultured meat, meat that's being grown in a lab. If you want to see serious uh, strides in the way of, I guess, protecting animals' rights, then that's the way to do it. And I also, and this is, I guess, the area where most people don't follow me, because it's a little weird, I guess, is that I think that suffering comes, most suffering in the living world doesn't come from humans. It happens in the wild because of predatory animals disemboweling other animals, and that's why I don't really have any bone to pick with fox hunting. In as much as I believe that there's a certain moral category of beings that have a right to life that stands independent of utilitarian considerations. So I am like a deontologist in that respect. But obviously that's not like an absolutely inalienable right, right? Because we accept that there are certain situations in which it would be acceptable to kill someone. For instance, dangerous people, murderers, in self-defense, etc. And it's for exactly the same reasoning that applies in that situation, I think, applies to predatory animals. So I don't have any objection to people hunting and slaughtering them. And although ultimately what I would like to do is so it isn't ethical to just involuntarily sterilize human beings, right? And the reason that it isn't moral to do that to humans is because humans have a capacity to kind of think about the distant future and long-term goals in a way that would be compromised by involuntarily sterilizing someone. Whereas I think, a cat isn't really going to be that dismayed if it's spayed, has its balls cut off, etc. I've used this example before. Or if it mates and then that mating just doesn't lead to pregnancy and reproduction. They have an instinct to have sex, but they don't think about childbearing capacity as a goal in the same way that human beings do. And that's why I think that ideally the ethical thing to do would be to sterilize most of the living world and humanize it. I've told you about the world of algae and potato farms, where all animate life, apart from humans, that's capable of suffering is phased out or brought under human control. But in reality, of course, this is pragmatist as much as I like to wax lyrical about these kinds of things. And I recognize that what's really going to happen is that we're going to just destroy nature, essentially, as our population continues to grow, and as we devise more and more ingenious ways to extract the resources that we need from our environment. A lot of environmentalists don't like this, but I'm not even saying whether or not it's good or bad. I'm just pointing out the obvious here, which is that there is no precedent, none whatsoever, in human history for human beings to see something in their environment that they want, understand and comprehend how to acquire it and how to exploit nature to produce more of it or whatever, and then just ignore it. The situations in which we leave nature alone now are just because we don't need it or we don't want anything from it. But as our material demand continues to increase and the population continues to grow, that will change, and we will continue to take over more and more of nature and in large part destroy it. And although it isn't the ideal thing ethically, I think ultimately in the end, it will be a better world because it'll phase out the just the utilitarian horrors of the natural world that I was talking about before. Animals running around disemboweling each other. Many people have an extremely romanticized view of nature because they've watched, too many David Attenborough documentaries or whatever, nature documentaries. But the reality is that much of it is actually quite horrifying when you look below the surface. It's really not something that fills me with warm, fuzzy feelings when I think about it. It actually is quite horrendous. So I hope that was all consistent and interesting.
Yeah, no. So one thing I do want to note is I don't so much worry about the idea of like humans kind of using up and destroying all of nature, just because even if humans do have like limitless demands, it's not really just like one mass lump thing, right? Like it's a changing, shifting thing over time, and whenever you have a process of acquiring a thing, right? If you're depleting like specific resources to do it over time, if there's a true scarcity, right, up to and including the risk of it being completely depleted, and completely like erased, right, this is forever loss of the biodiversity in whatever form it might come. Well, as you approach that, the resources become infinitely more expensive, and then simultaneously, as you've been engaged in this process, you're also increasing the supply of the thing that you're getting out of it, right? So you have two mechanisms in place that should, on balance, right? At least I hope on balance, kind of keep things there. And the only cases where it wouldn't pan out would be cases where people basically ascribe absolutely no value to the last of the thing, which you know, kind of makes you wonder, well, what's the point, right? Because like, with the whole biodiversity argument, you say, well, why should we preserve all the stuff? And we say, oh, well, because maybe it's useful for this or that. Maybe we just don't know yet. And if we have more, then like we'll have more options later, right? And that's perfectly sensible. But the argument, of course, is it doesn't amount to the thing in itself, right? Being valued. But in theory, that shouldn't be a very high bar to meet. The other thing too is, since we're getting more and more capacity to produce like artificial new forms of life and things, well, now there's this question of, does it become reasonable to say it's more worthwhile for us to invest resources in new designs and new creations? And there's an opportunity cost to some of our preservation efforts because, maybe we preserve one novel thing that came from nature, but we'll be able to create like 10 or 12 or 100 new things that are technically artificial, but they're like totally distinct, cool, designed new forms of life, you know? So I don't know how
From
responsive that is so much. It's not necessarily a contradiction, but just that's kind of my reasoning for like I don't really worry so much about humans being in conflict with nature because I think there's a lot more synergy than we give it credit, even to so-called like artificial things. You know, humans are just animals too, right? Like our buildings are essentially just our version of like a beaver dam.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really observe that distinction between what's natural and what's artificial, in the way that most people seem to,
It's
because
not clear cut. Yeah, it's really not clear cut. And honestly, it seems that typically people place a positive value judgment on the natural, and that's essentially just defined as not humans, right? So it sets up a really kind of insidious anti-human worldview.
yeah, and our brains are the result of a natural process, so there's nothing that we do that can be considered against nature, which includes like um well, cutting down trees or blowing things up or whatever. It's all part of nature.
Right, and if you the problem though is of course once we've defined nature in that way, which I think is the most neutral and accurate way to put it, it kind of becomes a non-concept. So then it's like not even really useful, which is why I tend to avoid like distinctions like that, and I avoid terms like human nature and things like that because typically it's just kind of a stand-in for something that actually needs to be unpacked. And
Yeah.
typically, when people are using a more specified understanding of any of these things, it's just a way for them to cheat in something that they don't want to have to justify up front. So I guess a Trojan horse would be a way to put it. This concept of nature.
Yeah, well, some philosophers use it to just mean that which exists, basically.
Yeah.
That's the definition of nature, but that's more of a philosopher's understanding of it. It's not how everyday people use the term.
Well, and the other way frequent in philosophies is that natural also means like physical world, which I guess
Yeah,
is kind of the same thing you said, but yeah. I don't know how much more there is in this article. They just go on to talk about like, well, other celebrities do this behind closed door. This like Satanism kind of thing of killing animals. Like the thing that I see is like these sorts of like pointless like ritualistic uses of animals. I find like a lot more abhorrent compared to, you know, like getting a bunch of
what
fish.
so what in particular are you talking about? Sorry, I forget.
Her, I guess this would be the desecration of a cat's corpse, but then just also this general idea of like sacrificing animals for something stupid. I guess that's my
Yeah,
value judgment is like if it's for like a religious ceremony. I know people will make the arguments, oh, it's good for the community and it means this thing and the tradition and I get it. People have those value judgments, and I guess I have to just agree to disagree because I guess maybe it does kind of come down to that, right? As a meat eater, I've opened that door.
I mean, obviously, I agree with you. It is disgusting, but the thing about eating meat is that it comes down to well, it comes down to how much faith you put in uh, basically the genetic component to human behavior. Like, I just don't think it's possible to talk that many people out of eating meat. And even if, well, and you would need like a significant number of people behind it to start distributing like propaganda even to that effect that most people would actually see and respond to. So I think it's more productive to basically push for well cultured lab grown meat, because the thing is that even if the number of people eating meat in society reduced by say 10% or whatever it might be, a significant percentage, it wouldn't actually stop meat from being produced. What would happen is that the producers would just lower their prices, because that's how basic economics works. So it's not uh, humans aren't going to stop eating meat anytime soon, basically. So it's like, as a moral hobby horse, I just see it as kind of pointless, even though I agree with the ethical vegan argument.
Well, that's the thing too is when you have in vitro tarianism on the table, It's kind of like if you're talking about an abortion thing, then you put the artificial uteri on the table, right? It just sidesteps this entire massive shit show, and then and it's so tempting too because these things they're plausible, right? So when you know that future technology is basically going to completely invalidate some big moral or ethical quabble people are having, it's pretty tempting to just say like, hey, like I'm just gonna bank on the future technology and focus on other problems because this problem will be irrelevant soon.
Yeah,
And like there's no
I don't know.
ideological angle, right, that also achieves the same end. At least not and not no obvious one. So some people are ickened out by the idea of like eating lab grown meat. We're both not, but I think maybe that is unusual. But I also think like lab grown meat is probably going to be super fun for people to market. Like I think once it's like a thing that like some chain of restaurants is doing, right? They'll be like in vitro burger, and it'll end up being this major chain because it was the first one to do it, and they'd, maybe do a whole fun theme of it being sciencey and lab grown or something, and I don't know. Like they'll
Yeah,
kind of lean
well,
into it,
I mean,
right?
the thing about that is billions of people eat insects, right? Eat invertebrates, even mollusks, which I find disgusting personally, but I know people who have no trouble eating them. So if people can learn to eat those things without being too squicked out, then I don't see why people couldn't become accustomed to lab-grown meat.
Well, I think hot dogs are a great comparison, right? Everybody knows how hot dogs are made, and I don't know, that doesn't stop me. Like shit, I'll eat a hot dog in a hot dog factory.
Yeah, I don't know how it's made. I'm guessing it's some grisly, like the entrails of the pig or like its intestines or some shit.
Right, so what they do is they kind of empty out the intestines, right? And that's kind of the outer skin. And then they basically just take anything, like the nipples, ears, whatever, any bit of a pig that you couldn't really sell as like a slice of meat, they kind of just grind it all up into a paste. And then they fill the intestines back with that, and that's how you get your hot dog. That's my understanding.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I still eat hot dogs, so
I like
yeah.
spam too. I think spam is underrated.
Yeah, it's very popular in Britain.
Yeah, the thing I like about spam is it's almost like the closest like cheap easy thing you can get that tastes a little bit like duck. Because duck has that really like pungent like awesome flavor and it's all thick sliced. And spam, spam's not as good as duck, but it's kind of like you can't just find duck usually. It's a little tricky, but spam you just grab it out of Walmart.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I don't really agree with the comparison that you made about abortion because it's like I don't think artificial uteri, I don't think that's ever really going to be a mainstream technology that'll replace abortion. And the thing is that you know, this isn't like eating meat where there's a precedent of millions of years of evolution for well, basically the fact that human beings evolved to eat meat, and that's basically sort of a powerful buffer against any propaganda or whatever that tries to turn people into vegans in significant numbers. But we know societies that have, well, where abortion isn't normalized, and it basically is what it is. And the consequences of having the wrong take on abortion are serious because if you have the wrong take on it, then you are talking about murder essentially of a morally relevant category of being. So
Right. No, I see that because obviously banking on the artificial uteri is a little bit okay. It's a lot less realistic than banking on lab grown meat. So then there is the
yeah,
question of like the long term game of it. I mean, but I'm trying to think because the pro choice argument, right, is that the the ones who would be born otherwise end up all being criminals and rapists, right? And that we avoided a massive crime surge that would have happened that was expected by Roe v. Wade. I'm not sure how true that is. That was an example they used in Freakonomics. I would argue though that if you grant the pro life premise, right, then it becomes irrelevant because you'd
the
literally need like one for one by predetermination every single non-aborted baby ends up murdering someone, right?
Yeah.
Which is a little bit absurd. But that's always the issue. I know I've said it before, but my whole issue with the entire debate is that either the pro-lifers are correct, in which case the pro-choice arguments are completely irrelevant, or the pro-life side is incorrect, in which case the entire pro-choice argument is completely irrelevant. So it really all just comes down to those claims. Like, is this human fetal life inside uterus? Is this a category of life that's worthy of moral concern? That's basically the only question.
So if you believe it's murder, then all of these utilitarian considerations about crime and whatever become irrelevant. Is that
Yeah.
basically?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, because in that case, the utilitarian concerns have to include killing a bunch of babies, right? So
Yeah.
so when you want to make your pragmatist case, you've kind of got a lot of dead babies to climb over.
Here's
That's typically not a not a strong negotiating position.
yeah. I'm surprised. I've never really seen anybody have a good go at making the atheist case for well, basically the pro-life argument. I don't think you can take the atheist case for the pro-life position as far as, say, fundamentalist Christians do. That is all the way back to the moment of conception. But I guess, I'll give it a shot. The way I think about it is so if you're a complete utilitarian, you've probably heard this this hypothetical case where there's someone who needs an operation that, say, medical technology is in a place where you can just replace several organs without a hitch, and it happens that there's someone, or no, 5 people in the waiting room who have all of the organs that you need to perform the operation. And oh no, wait, sorry, I fucked that up. I've got it the other way around. You have 5 people who need organs, and there's 1 person in the waiting room who has everything you need. Utilitarianism says that you have to kill the person in the waiting room, and then you save the 5 people. Utilitarianism says you have to do that, and because of it's just, well, numerical, right? It's like the well-being of those 5 people has to take precedence over the 1 person by utilitarian reasoning. And then the counter argument that's sometimes made to this is, well, this would have all kinds of knock-on effects on society if this if it became known this is something that happened. But then all you have to do is just take the situation to a vacuum. Like, okay, so what if it happened on the dark side of the moon? Or what if it happened in a situation where you could be sure that no one could find out about it? Then utilitarianism says you have to do it. You have to kill the 1 person in the waiting room to save the 5 people who need the organs. And obviously, I think this is insane, but it isn't possible to object to it as insane with a purely utilitarian ethic. You have to say then that people have a rescindable, obviously, because there are certain situations where it's acceptable to kill someone, self-defense, etc. But there is a rescindable right to life that stands apart from utilitarian considerations. And we were talking about veganism before, which is that gets into sort of an element of this where it isn't just about human life that's the morally relevant category that has this right to life that we're calling it. It's just some morally relevant category, but however it's defined, but that's a separate issue. So in the case of the abortion issue, it's about figuring out when the fetus or the embryo enters the category that's relevant for more consideration. Where does it become murder? And obviously, I agree with when pro-choice people say that it doesn't make sense to say from conception, because at that point it is just a single cell or a few cells, and it's like you kill thousands of cells every time you scratch it or take a shower. So obviously that doesn't make any sense. But then you
Yeah,
do have to.
but I've
Yeah.
heard like Sam Harris make that argument. I remember I read that argument in Letter to a Christian Nation when I was a very agreeable high schooler. um,
Yeah.
but I used to think it was persuasive, but I will take issue just with the thing that the problem with the comparison, right, is those cells have a placement and a relation, right, that they are growing uniquely, whereas on your notes it's a bunch of dead skin cells, right, with no relation that's particularly meaningful, right, to the other ones. And maybe I've packaged too much in meaning. Maybe that's kind of the Achilles heel of what I'm saying here. But you know what I mean, though. Like it's like you can't just like numerically say like, well, when I scratched my nose, I removed like 15 well, thousands of skin cells or however many. I don't I don't know what even know what number of digits it would be. And then therefore, the removal of this numerical number of human cells is comparable, right? You know what I mean?
Kind
So
of.
so 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 it's not just like a 1-to-1 trade-off, human cell to human cell, right? We're talking about something much more specific.
I mean, the morally relevant thing is basically that you're not hurting anything in either case, because the when you scratch your nose, the cells that you're removing or killing don't have the ability yet to process any kind of experience, and that's also true with like an embryo in the first week or whatever, very early.
See, but if we go by the standard that places too much of an emphasis on like suffering, then I think we just spiral off into
Oh,
pure
okay.
antinatalism, right? Then we just need to have oblivion.
I'll get to that as well. So
Okay. All right, sorry, I just
like
wanted to chime in with that while it was the point you were making.
yeah. So the morally relevant category, it's obviously not just about when pro choice people talk about well, the a fetus at this stage of development doesn't feel any pain. That's like a very weak standard, obviously, because we have adult human beings with congenital analgesia. Um, One thing that you can say that comes close is if it doesn't yet have the ability to process any kind of experience, no higher faculties, no memories, no sense data coming in, vision, hearing, or anything. Nothing that we would recognize as a consciousness. And then there's a compelling counter to that that says, well, you could say all of those same things about like a coma patient or something like that, because they also they basically match that standard as well. So then you have to figure out, what is the difference between a pre-conscious fetus and a coma patient that makes one morally important and the other not. And the one that I've come up with that I think makes the most sense is just that um whatever it might be the case, it's just that with the coma patient, the fact that they have a history and memories and that they had consciousness, right? It's sort of like the hardware's all in place and it all works, and it's just a question of maybe it's possible to then switch that back on again at some point in the future through medical breakthroughs or whatever. And that's morally significant in a way that, say, an embryo, which is pre-conscious, which has never had any of those capacities because it hasn't developed them yet, is not. And I think that's the most sensible place to draw the line. That's why I've come up with this like ballpark figure of like 8 to 10 weeks, because I think it has to be later than when it's just a few cells for the reasons that I mentioned before, but also before it has the ability to process any kind of real experience or consciousness that we would recognize. So 10 weeks ish is sensible, I think.
Yeah, and I guess the nice thing about that standard, there's two things that are good about it, which is it. I think that maps onto people's just general like moral ew factor pretty well, right? I think that if you ask most pro-lifers and most pro-choicers, like people will you'll tend to see people clustering around like, yeah, once you're 8 to 10 weeks in, that's where they start to feel it's morally dubious, even if the way they articulate the actual argument puts them somewhere totally different. I think that's like where a general like good moral sensibility is. But then the other thing that's nice about the argument is it removes like intention from it, because that's the like if I'm trying to think of a way to um, argue against this, right? I try to think, well, maybe there's a difference if a person has like a clear intention, right? That would change what becomes a moral or immoral action in those 8 to 10 weeks. But I don't know. I can't quite see how that really makes sense, and I'm actually kind of liking the idea that it removes that entire aspect, because I think that's I don't know. Like for example, like intentionality becomes important in the discussion when it's like was it a miscarriage versus an abortion, right?
Yeah.
Right. So because that kind of would be a part of it, a part of that calculus. But
But I'm curious though, did the way I explain it line up with many of your intuitions? Because this is the thing, it's like a pre-conscious, that's the term I'm going to use, a pre-conscious embryo, and a person, an adult human who's in a coma. You could say that they have a lot or even almost everything in common in terms of their faculties, or their lack of faculties rather. But the morally significant difference is just that the adult who's a coma patient has all of the hardware in place. It's just that it's malfunctioning and needs to be switched back on, if that's possible. And that's important and has to be respected in a way that isn't the case of a pre-conscious fetus, which doesn't have any of the hardware in place in the first place because it's too early.
right, there's a huge difference when they have a history. I guess that's I think the positive way of stating pre-conscious, right? Is you're either pre-conscious or you have history. So I wonder if that is another way of putting it. No, what I was gonna say though. First of all, I'm not sure I know I've seen it before, but I hadn't seriously considered the importance, right, of doing it on a standard based on pre-consciousness, because I think that is kind of a clear way to cut to, I don't know, a pretty strong position on it. It reminds me though of there is this book called The Pig That Wants to Be Eaten, and it's basically just each chapter is like a different philosophical puzzle. They had one on abortion, and the setup of it, right, is a woman wakes up and she was like in an accident or whatever, and she's attached to someone else who like she needs to be attached to them for however many months for life support. And the reason that's interesting, that this is an interesting scenario, is that you can kind of variate it in different ways by changing the scenario of how they got in there, or by changing who the person is that she's attached to, right?
Right.
And of course, one of the things that you say is like, okay, well, the person she's attached to is like a virtuosic piano player. They're an extremely talented, well-loved person. Like, surely it would be evil, right, to disconnect this person, right? And of course, on the flip side, you do the whole Hitler argument, because that's the cliche, right? But then, of course, the immediate thing everyone realizes is that there's a difference, because the fetus doesn't exist. The baby doesn't. We don't know these things, right? So to compare it to a situation where it's been determined, you know who it is you're saving or not, makes it like a horrible comparison. But that's based on a person's like actual history and their actual actions. So, yeah, maybe the
Yeah.
precognition standard also gets around that, but.
On a
I think that's pretty reasonable, but
Yeah, I mean, like, people make it sound like people talk as though it's really complicated. I don't think it is that complicated. Like, it took me a while to explain it, but that's it's gonna sound arrogant, but the most compelling case for like a pro-life argument, or a relatively pro-life argument in basically an atheist worldview, is the one that I've just come up with.
Well, honestly, I would just package it as a pro-choice argument, right? It's just pro-choice with limits, because most pro-choice
Sure.
people are pro-choice with a limit, right? So I don't see how it's any less arbitrary to set the limit at 10 weeks rather than, up to 10 seconds before birth or
Well,
after, I
it's not.
guess.
It's not. It isn't completely arbitrary though. Like for all of the reasons I've just talked about.
No,
Like
no, no, no. Right, right, right. What
I
I
have.
mean though is if a person has a standard like that, right? There's no grounds for saying that the 10-week standard is less arbitrary. Or
Yeah.
is by default, I mean, or I guess more arbitrary by default is what I mean.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess there
Is,
is a way to complicate it though. And I guess we would be blurring the line between like the atheist and the spiritual. So it's going to be an obnoxious line of reasoning,
I was
which is
just I was just gonna add. I think the reason why, to the extent that there's even any argument about this among atheists at all, because most atheists are pro-choice, but the reason many people make the debate seem a lot more complicated than it really needs to be, I think, is because my argument relies on a non-utilitarian assumption that there's some category of beings, let's call them persons, which that's a whole other like philosophical discussion, what personhood is and whether it includes both humans and non-humans and what
yeah. I was gonna
categories it
say,
includes.
yep. You're gonna lose a lot of people by slipping personhood in there. I'm gonna say, wait a
Yeah,
minute. Yep.
but
It makes it so
person
hard. That's the real reason it's hard to explicate a lot of this, right? Is because all the
yeah.
terms are so contentious, even though it doesn't really need to be that complicated.
Yeah, but my argument assumes that persons have a right to life that stands apart from any kind of utilitarian weighing of pleasure versus suffering or anything like that. And then the argument that that I've just laid out is basically centered around, okay, so when does someone enter personhood? When is someone of the moral status that they are afforded this right? Whereas most atheists don't think in this way because utilitarianism seems to be very attractive to most atheists, so they get stuck in this just gravy train of trying to come up with utilitarian based justifications for everything, which is well, yeah, silly, but
Well, and
in my
that's
opinion.
always been my biggest pet peeve. Because after I was no longer religious, to me it was never obvious though that you approach all these moral questions from this like strict utilitarian perspective. But I in my experience, yeah, people do just kind of take that for granted. And then it's really annoying because then people then say, well, progressivism and atheism and then secularism and humanism, that's a religion too. And it's not, but there is a contingent of people that do treat those things as a religion. So I can't blame people when they perceive that, right? And then name that category. It just it's annoying though when you're in that ideological minority because yeah, I was a little bit
Yeah,
annoying in college too because that was kind of always the thing. Like you want to look for like objective ethical justifications for things, right? These are like these are your classic philosophical quests, right? It's the it's like the philosopher's stone of philosophy. um and
didn't it get
it's funny to
final in
me
America?
that people just yeah, but then people who will go into philosophy, but they're not interested in those questions because they I guess they see it as silly or they think it's already been resolved or whatever, or I guess they just didn't have the same I guess more romanticized view of it that I have.
Well, I understand why people are dismayed by moral philosophy when they find out what it mostly consists in these days, because most academic philosophy departments are filled with utilitarians who, yeah, I'm sounding like a hardcore trad cath or something in the way I'm describing them. I'm not. It's just factually true. Like they're filled with atheist utilitarians who basically make a living of trying to ethically reconcile like the organ donor problem in a utilitarian framework, like Sam
Oh
Harris
yeah,
sometimes tries to, and it's
ethical
just
dilemmas are
so
stupid. Ethical dilemmas because they don't happen in reality. So by design, they're designed to set up a certain thing. I get that they follow, like they're appealing because it looks like good logical arguments if based on the principles, but it's always way too particular to the scenarios for it to actually apply as any kind of principle. That's kind of the general rule. They're more like magic tricks.
yeah. Uh, it's why like moral philosophy, it also seems to be filled with a lot of like don't know if it's too judgmental of me, but it does seem to attract a lot of like nitwit sort of people with the same cookie cutter opinions on everything, compared with like the disciplines of philosophy that are a bit more adjacent to physical sciences, adjacent to cosmology and whatever, like the people who work on consciousness and whatnot. Because that actually does get into quite deep questions about like the fundamental nature of reality and whatever, if like you pursue it to the nth degree. But yeah, moral philosophy is it's the only branch of philosophy that you see teenage girls pontificating about on Twitter, in an attempt to sound clever, and that should tell you an awful lot about the discipline.
Do they though? I don't know. Like philosophy's always been something, just like physics and like other things. Actually, philosophy's weird because it is male quote unquote dominated, or it's male populated is the more neutral term. But it's a little bit hard to pinpoint the reason because it has to be like the most accessible thing. It's literally the lowest common denominator of thinking. Right? The idea of like entryism in philosophy, at least at the basic level, right, of just doing the thing. All the books are free domain, right? Like nobody's making money off Plato. At least nobody should be, right? If you know how to Google it, right?
Yeah, it's
I
on Wikimedia or whatever, all
yeah,
of Plato's
exactly.
and
I mean,
Socrates as
yeah,
well.
you,
Yeah,
you you can pay for it, right? If you want like a specific thing of it. I don't know why you would, but yeah, I just wanted to tie the chat in here though, because who is someone new here?
yeah. Jay Willie's here. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, hey. I was just gonna say, so in the chat we're having we've got a couple people who have been reading Hillary Clinton's emails, because we're tying the in vitro tarianism into the elite practice of harvesting adrenochrome, but they need to have just the structures necessary to create the adrenochrome. And I proposed that like a misery face on a big fat blob, but apparently it's a little bit more complicated than that. Now I'm wondering, do our little lab-grown misery blobs for adrenochrome harvesting? What are the abortion rules on that?
Jay Willie probably doesn't know what in vitrotarianism means. You might want to clarify that.
It's when we
It
eat
sounds like in
lab-grown
vitro
meat.
fertilization.
It's lab-grown meat. We're growing
Yes.
our
Oh
meat
God.
like in 3D printers. Oh, you're grossed out by it? We're in favor. We're hashtag
No, I
TM.
am like I'm not against it, but the thought just grows me out. But I'm not against it just because it's like it's just because I think gross. That doesn't mean it should that I'm not in favor of it.
Yeah, I
It's
think
fine. It's
I'm
fine.
quite excited.
Like, I think people can if they want to do it, then you can do all that how much you want. It's completely fine with me. But I'm just not gonna get involved more personally.
I'm just amused by the image of it. But also, okay, Terrence had said something. Oh yeah. This was a little bit interesting. He mentioned that Kazum thinks that once artificial wombs are a thing, like abortion should be off the table because the choice should be okay. Either you give birth or you hand it over to an artificial womb. And it's interesting, right? Because the way I see it initially is that artificial uteri just become a new part of abortion, right? Like abortion doesn't it includes killing the baby because that's the current method that we have available to us, assuming that that's the thing you're going to do. Once you have methods where you can put it in the artificial uteri, it just stands to reason, right? That would then be the standard go-to process. And then if somebody were to say, no, I don't want it in the artificial uterus, I want it killed, well, that would be a little bit like I don't know, like going in for surgery and then like demanding they butcher you. You know what I mean? Like when you sign up for the thing, you get the medical practice, right? That does the least harm. So I never thought of it in that context, but I could also see how people are there's a distinct right to terminate the life, right? Because should they just put it in the artificial uteri and forget about it, they know forever that the baby goes on to exist and it has their genes, and in theory that you could have a hang up regarding that. So that is kind of an interesting scenario. I would side on this.
Like I would. Yeah. I would say that I have very interesting information to bring to that, because I've seen a lot of people that think that killing your kid, right? The reason why they don't think women should be punished when they do that is because they see that like as a form of abortion, right? And you also see that when they basically want to have abortion after kids are born, right? And you basically also see that you basically see a lot of women say, no, it's fine if she killed her kids, her body, her choice, right? They basically doesn't really see. They think it's like that it's like a lot of these people, they think that like children are used mother's property, right? Which is kind of funny because they don't believe in property rights, because they're usually all communists. Yeah, so that's basically an interesting thing that we need to tell. But something that's even more interesting, right, is that a woman wanted to use an embryo to get pregnant, right? Because she couldn't get pregnant again because she only froze an embryo, not like her own eggs, because she's a fucking retard, right? And then she wanted she wanted the guy that made the embryo. She wanted to hold him responsible for child support when she got the embryo implanted into her. And because he didn't want to pay for child support, he said that he wanted the embryo destroyed. And he got it destroyed, but the only reason why he could do that was just because he wouldn't get on. Because they argued that he shouldn't be held responsible for. Because if he held responsible for that person's like liable to child support, right? Then he had the right to terminate it because it was his body, his choice. If that makes sense.
Well, that's kind of a crazy scenario because I could totally imagine you present that to most people and they have this image of, oh, the man destroyed the embryo, right? Like, right? And you think of that in such a different way from like, oh, like the woman terminated the embryo, right? Because this was like this is probably the earliest abortion you could ever conceivably do, right? But it is funny that it comes down to the child support thing because the obvious way to split the baby would be to just say that she can keep the embryo, but he doesn't have to pay child support, right?
Yeah, but the funny part is that the reason why he cut destroy was because she wouldn't drop the child support.
Oh,
she really,
okay.
Really,
This literally was a modern day retelling of the splitting the baby parable, right? Where the state says, well, you want the baby and the child support, like how about you be fucking reasonable or whatever. Like, give him his money. Otherwise, we're going to split the embryo in half. And she wanted the money. She would not split the embryo from the money. So, is that
it was actually kind of...
It's a little bit, it's a little clunky. It's a little clunky, but I think it fits.
No, it does fit. It does fit. Because like because he didn't want her to have it. He just wanted it to be destroyed, right? So I don't think that he was like... And he also wanted his money, right? But it was that she wanted his money. The reason that he could use that to mandate that it was destroyed. If she would have backed off and say, "I promise you would not get any money. I would not get any money from you. And government should get nothing to do with this. I promise to leave you alone 100%. No legal consequence, nothing at all." Right? She didn't do that. But if she would have done that, then she probably would have been able to take in that. But it's so funny because if a man says that to a woman to want an abortion, right, they just say, no, she has the right to have an abortion anyway, right? Which is kind of awful in my opinion. I actually don't support that, right? But the funny part about this, when I told my mother about all these information about that he wanted this destroyed because he didn't want to pay child support, and she was like, yeah, of course. Well, if women want equality, then this is equality, and they just have to deal with it.
They don't.
No, I know they don't, but she won't, right? So you show like that's the reason why she said that. Like he's one of the few women that actually want to be treated equal to men, which is like really rare. But she said that the reason why and therefore, if women should have the right to not be to their body when it comes to that, then that should be extended to men too. So she was 100% in favor of him destroying these embryoes because the woman wanted his money for him, if that makes sense.
I wonder if there are cases of women who they murder their baby but also collect child support, right?
Oh my God, no!
And then I wonder if enough time goes by and then it's unearthed, like, that baby disappeared, like a year or so ago, right? People start asking questions. It all comes to surface. I wonder if she doesn't even pay back the child support money.
I actually don't think she will. Like,
I wonder if the government views it as, well, she was the baby was in the care of her during that time period, right? Or like or something. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, obviously that would be not the primary concern, but is that a loophole? Like, I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me, but
yeah,
I'm just kind of I'm just speculating because it had occurred to me. That's all.
On a slightly lighter note, I suppose, only Derek will know what I'm talking about because I sent it to him. But so what did you think of the Pedo-Geddon special episode of Brass Eye that I sent you, Derek?
Oh yeah, it was pretty funny.
Yeah,
frickin' lame. You have to go to like Vimeo to see it.
well,
but...
I don't know if this is related, but to that fact, but so it was released in 2001, July, I think. So it was before 9/11, incidentally. And at the time, it was one of the most complained about TV shows in British television history. Supposedly because loads of people thought it was a real news program.
That's like hysterically funny.
Yep.
I wonder. It would be golden to listen to records of people calling in to complain. Like if people calling the police officer or whatever, or headquarters,
Yeah.
they call it, I suppose.
It's like yet another testament to the futility of trying to like actively win over normies when this is their basic level of intelligence. It's just so futile.
No, yeah, and that's why the solution is not political, and the solution is not really based on ideas. The solution is agorism. That's it.
Yeah. Like, it's interesting the way the nomenclature checks out there, because a lot of people eventually come to identify themselves as apolitical after they've been discussing politics for years. Like, this is kind of what happened with Brandon Adamson, although it's complicated what he calls himself. But, I've heard him and people who are in the same circles as me and him say things like that. But when they say they're apolitical, they don't mean that their opinions have changed on political issues. Those things are all still important to them. What they really mean is that they don't think resistance is possible within the system. Like, it isn't going to be possible to form a party within current governments that can resist the trends in society that they find distasteful. So when they call themselves apolitical, they basically mean that they want to cut themselves off from the politics of this society and just create new societies.
Right. Well, and it could even be something more fundamental than that, because what you described is, I guess, the political view, is something Konkin described as partyism or partitarianism or whatever. Right. This idea that like people kind of without ever thinking, right? They just did he say partyarchy or party? I think he does say partyarchy.
Yeah, I said that. I think he said that because I've heard it.
Yeah, it's pretty funny, right? But it's funny because like nobody ever challenges that basic premise, and that's the obvious example, right? Is the American Libertarian Party. They're not libertarian, like decisively, but of course they have the name, so they basically get to be this controlled opposition of the state. Most of them don't realize that's kind of the role they're playing, but by becoming a party, they're never going to outweigh the damage, at least in terms of like spreading ideas or whatever, things like that, because they're not going to get any political power, any real political change, right? So if it's about spreading the idea, well, they've done more damage than good just by implicitly endorsing partyarchy. The other funny thing
But
too,
like,
I didn't realize this, but I was listening to one of ESO and Heretic's streams. I think this was just earlier or last week, right? And they mentioned that when Konkin brings up minarchism, he was actually one coining the phrase, and two, it was to mock them. It was like a term of derision. I
and that's the
haven't
reason.
verified that, but I think that's really funny if true.
No, but
Both
I basically
things.
see the reason to a lot of people who call themselves conservatarian or minarchist libertarians, and they basically have the same ideas that are completely wrong with statism, but just call it not status. Like one example of a guy, he basically said that he was against the welfare and all government money, except for single mothers. And the problem with the welfare state today, the reason why the government are bad to many people, and the reason why they want to become libertarian, is because we don't like a government telling who should get whose money. So they just want to accept the government to tell who should get whose money anyway. I'm like, then what's the fucking point with not being statist?
Right.
Then I can just say, oh, then I want the government to give me all the money.
And that's where it is, right? I still think the way Molyneux put it is very timeless and perfect, which is that the purpose of the state is to be the only kind of a class of criminal, right? Is you make it so that you are the only one who's allowed to steal and incarcerate and do these things. So it's always establishing the universal rule first, but then you have the middle truth where you carve out the exception. And obviously that's the big difference. That's really the defining characteristic of the state.
Yeah, like that would basically have I don't say it's incorrect or anything because it's not, but I have one different like perception of the state, and I basically say that the only purpose a state could have that would be good is to protect its citizens from. The only purpose a government could have is protect the citizens from other governments. Um, so, like, if a country, for example, were to dissolve, then the other government is going to go in there and fuck over it, like happened in Somalia, right? All the governments are making the country into a hellhole, like, and so like the only thing is like the purpose of a government is to protect the country or people from other governments, right? And if governments don't, if people don't see that, then they're not going to hold the government accountable to the level it should be and hold accountable to. And that is why I call them statists and not myself statists, if that makes sense. Because they basically have government as a faith-based action they think is necessary. I don't think it's necessary. I only think that the only thing it could do that wouldn't be harmful is to protect citizens from other governments. When governments fail doing that, that's the reason why I think they're bad. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it's just not fundamentally consistent, I think. Like, because it's always tempting, right, to point to like, oh, this doesn't work or whatever, or some kind of end, because it's everywhere, it not working and just being shitty and making life horrible for everyone, right? So they're not, it's not untrue, right? But I always fundamentally always have to circle back. That's our phrase of the month, right? Circle back to just to it fundamentally falls apart because the premises are contradictory.
I mean, like, I mean that, like, if you have a government and you think I think all governments are bad, right? If the French government or the South African government didn't exist, right, then we might have an even worse government with even more power to come in and then do all the horrible things that these governments are doing, but more effectively. And that was just like not making anything better. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and actually, I want to comment on that because that's such a common form of an argument, right? They justify the bad thing by saying, well, it could be worse, right? This might be just a necessary evil or the least of all bad options. The problem with that is that I mean, there's a couple of problems. Oh shoot, I think I just lost my thought.
I can talk in the meantime if you want to.
Yeah, go for it.
And then I will basically say that if you look at it, like, I don't think that there is like this government is better than this government. No, they're not. Like all governments in all countries are all 100% bad. Because if we can point to a law that is bad, then that makes that government completely bad. That makes it bad. They cannot have one bad thing and then some good things. No, they can't. They can either be not bad, right? And all 100% of the governments have failed. All countries have failed at not being bad, right?
Okay,
You can
yeah,
see
yeah.
that.
So that's
So I don't
part of
think
it. That reminds me of what I was gonna say is that you have these states, right? And under the statist paradigm, the state is justified, and then the non-state actors are not justified, right? And then they say, well, if this government were gone, you'd have this invading force that would come in, and they would put in something even more brutal, right? But from the anarchic point of view, you view the state itself as one of these groups. There's then no reason to not view other states, even if they're not the ones that are commonly accepted, right, as the ones in power over that area, because fundamentally it's wrong all the way down, and this status of the state and its legitimacy is just a fiction, right? So then I say, the smallest government is when one person like mugs someone or steals something from someone else. They've essentially created a micro state, right, where they are the state and they've violated they violated the rights of someone else. And then it's basically just the state is the same as that, fundamentally just scaled up. So from an anarchic perspective, when you're looking at a scenario, right, where you're under a state and then the removal of that state means a worse one comes in, the anarchic perspective is more realistic because you don't imagine that one of these is good and justified and the other one isn't. You understand that they're both not justified and that they both need to be resisted. Whereas under the statist paradigm, you have this magical flip-flop land where once these people take over, well, now they're the state, and now you don't get to say anything about them.
Yeah, like I actually agree with you because like I don't think that the French or South African states are justified because they are bad, and if you want to hear why they are bad, then I think that would take a whole long time to go over, right? But like I wouldn't. But the reason why, like, if you basically would get another state getting power, then the thing is that it's not gonna. It might be worse, but it's not gonna get any better. It's just gonna be the same shit, or might even be worse. But that doesn't mean the original state is like justified or anything. The original state is bad. So what the best thing one could do is to if a state is less effective in being oppressive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and still though, it's all in the ends-based kind of approach to things, which I don't like those approaches because then you need to have evidence, and then even if no matter how good your evidence is, people can quabble over it because empiricism is so slippery.
But I actually have very simple evidence on how these states are unjustifiable.
It's never
and
simple enough.
Not a communist
it's never
would
simple
understand
enough,
why.
though. It's never simple enough. Everyone's retarded.
Yeah, everybody, but you are not retarded, so you will understand why I think the states are just.
Yeah, but I already have the like more deontological argument against it, right? Which I love it because it's a step 0.
Oh yeah, but like you basically made a one video where you basically, I don't know if you, I might remember it wrong, but you basically meant that like, if you really want a good government, then you should be an anarchist.
Hmm.
But that actually makes sense because if you basically have a government of like a group of people, right, and this complete freedom of association, disassociation with that group of people, then wouldn't that like be the best government, if that makes sense? Like distinguishing between government and state.
Oh yeah, that is another useful angle that maybe goes underutilized. It is a bit of an uphill battle though.
And one thing that makes it useful is when I watch like work of fiction, right? Almost all governments that are like they all works of fiction. They portray all governments that are good. They portray them as being free associative governments, right? And then portray all the villains as being in charge of like state governments, right? And I actually find it to be very funny that you can see it in basically every work of fiction. It's like, and then people say, oh wait, and then people like, I enjoy all that. They don't recognize that it's a libertarian perspective, and that's basically all the videos that all like movies and series portray like, they always portray the enemy as the aggressor. And you basically always and the enemy on the villain as they have their internal their internal justification for doing bad, which is usually like And then the whole narrative is like a threat narrative that these people, that evil people are going to do all the bad things to these other people that don't bother them. And then people think that they're not libertarian, but they don't like know that all work of fiction is basically all basically libertarian if you think about it for a little bit. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I think it checks out. Let's see
Lovely.
here.
Because a lot of people have like this cognitive dissonance when it comes to like threat narratives. They basically use threat narratives and then not accept the non-aggression principle. I'm like, then why do you have an issue with this? It doesn't make any sense. They're being hypocritical by using threat narratives and then rejecting non-aggression principle.
Yeah, and I know some people try to quabble over the NAP, but usually it's just that it's not specific enough. Like people
Either way,
generally
I
don't.
know it's
They don't like endorse flagrant transgressions of it. They always argue, well, this thing that I want is not a violation of it.
petty of me, but I think the word you're looking for is actually quibble, not quabble. I think what's happening is like your brain is like mashing together the words quibble and squabble, so you get quabble.
Quabble.
Yeah.
Did I say quabble?
Yes,
I don't remember saying quabble.
you did.
What
You
about
meant to say quibble, I think.
Is squabble a word?
Yes.
Wait, so squabble, but squibble
Yeah.
is not a word.
No, I don't think so.
I think it could be a word. Do you want to know one of my favorite made-up words? Geeth. Gath. It's the name for when you have like a hot drink and you get a little bit of that skin on top, like on top of hot chocolate. That's the geeth.
Yeah.
I thought, do you want to hear another very funny made-up word?
What is
Left
it?
Yes.
libertarianism. No, I was kidding.
Ha!
I guess it counts if it's hyphenated. But
Yeah. But that was just a joke, so I guess you get the premise.
yeah. I remember one time in school, like my teacher told me that the word humongous wasn't a real word.
That's a word. And
which
a
was
name.
stupid. Yeah.
Like, but like they need to be more dialectical because like, who is to say that like dialects of English, unique words are not English?
Yeah, that's another thing, or it's like a change in degree where it kind of becomes arbitrary when you draw the line, I
But,
think.
yeah, exactly. Because like if I use terms like domkop or oak, like those are English words. They're using certain dialects and not others. And if someone uses the term Barney in certain dialects, and some like, yeah, and a lot of these words that use in certain English dialects, right? They're not understood outside that. If other English Anglophones hear it, they don't know what that means. So you're basically like, what? But it's still English but it's just a dialect. And that's why people say, oh, that's not a real word. I'm like, so you mean it doesn't exist in any dialect of the language you're referring to at all? And if they don't say no, then they basically just have contradicted themselves, because if it exists in one dialect, it exists in the language. But I actually had a really good statement to explain the difference between a dialect and a language, and that was that a language is simply a dialect with an army.
Wait, oh, so you're saying that a language is just like a big dialect? Or a lot of people use it?
No, I'm not saying it. I'm just saying that has been used as a distinction between dialect and a language.
Well, but then you have creoles also, right? I guess that has to be like a blend of multiple different ones that are distinct otherwise.
Yeah, those are unique languages. But like, if someone basically want to say that, how different does a language have to be for it to be a dialect? How different does those two dialects have to be for them to be different languages?
Right.
And the main issue with that is basically if you had like a dialect continuum, right? they can all understand each other if you take the closer ones, but if you take the opposite ends, they don't understand each other. And they basically like, where's the cut-off point when it becomes a different language? And then when the people say, oh, that's the one with an army, that's the one with a distinct language, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Well, there was one other item that was posted in here. I think it was posted like right when the last stream ended. But it was that article that Fleegan posted about a movement of women to give up alcohol to fight the patriarchy.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just had a kind of looking and skimming over it, but it opens with, "Is alcohol having a Me Too moment?" Just anyway, first at orphan stats, male versus female alcohol use, because in general, men drink more often than women, but I think it's fairly close to 50-50. I think. It might be depending on how you break it down. But then they're just talking about how there was an incredible rise in women drinking during the pandemic. And of course, this is a women's issue because women get drunk faster off of less things and are more likely to binge drink. And of course, law enforcement officials say alcohol is the most common rape drug.
Okay, but like, isn't that kind of good to not get maximally drunk around random strangers that you don't like or trust? Isn't that like kind of stupid to do? Like, regardless of who you are?
No, because the author is very clear to point out. Let me put it on the screen here so we can all see, so that it is quoted right here. She has already let us know that this is by no means to say women who drink are asking to be assaulted, and instead of teaching guys that consent can't be obtained from a person who is incapacitated, society still falsely blames women for drinking and thus inviting assault.
I mean, like, if you drink, then, like, if you do something yourself with your own free will, then you should be blamed or credited for doing that thing. And if you think doing that is bad, then you will blame people for doing that. And if you think doing that is good, you will credit people for doing that. The only difference between blame or credit is if the person who blame or credit someone, if their value judgment, right? And if you basically like have a problem with people doing that, then you have then they have to justify what their subjective judgment is more justifiable than the other person's subjective judgment. Like, basically, this argument, if you break it down, it doesn't make sense.
No, of course not. It's absolutely ridiculous. And we know all the things about how the stats aren't reliable because they're basically, by definition, producing orphan stats. So that's kind of the only way to get a women's issue, is you just kind of rig it so that you only get orphan stats.
Like I would say that one example of people using something being a woman's issue is that some people, they basically just say that a lot of women, they basically say that, I think they call themselves both nationalists and feminists, right? But they're not actually feminists, it's nominal feminists, if that makes sense, right? And they say that, oh, immigration is bad because immigration leads to rape of women. Therefore, if you care about women, you need to oppose mass immigration. And I would say, like, and I think it's good that they do that, because I would rather have them doing that than, because at least they will, if they got their way, they would, like, do something that was good, in my opinion. But, like, but that doesn't mean that I think this, like, the mass immigration is inherently like a women problem. I hope that makes sense.
Wait, you don't think what's a woman's problem? You said mass immigration?
Yeah, they basically say mass immigration is a woman problem because it leads to women being treated worse in society.
Oh, yeah, but of course, I don't think they're not touching race in this article.
Yeah, but like a lot of people on the PC cry just because they have the self-cliche of anti-racism. Any woman who calls herself a feminist and then say that things, they're basically gonna demonize her quicker than a horse blinks his eye. I didn't know what would be quick, so I just had to think about that.
This is actually really interesting. She notes that men with issues related to grandiosity can benefit from focusing on surrender and humility. but women and people from other marginalized and oppressed groups aren't really drinking because they are entitled. Many drink because they never have been.
Because they what?
Entitled, I think, is what she means.
But then you said because they.
Have never been. I know it's poorly written. I think she's referencing being entitled.
But
She's-
like, doesn't she like realize how entitled she is as a woman writing all this?
she's bitching about Alcoholics Anonymous, which is fair enough. Like I think it's really sick the way the government and like judges and everyone use that as part of their like official, kinds of like therapy for people on alcohol because AA doesn't work for a lot of people, and they make a lot of unnecessary claims. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not a
I
fan.
never got it. I never got the idea that if you're an alcoholic at one point in your life, you would never be able to drink alcohol ever again without being an alcoholic again. Like that, I don't get that. Why can't you just return to who you were before you were an alcoholic?
Well, and also they have a series of steps that you go through, and it involves surrendering to a higher power. Like it's clearly modeled on Christianity, but then they try to pretend that it's non-theistic. I mean, clearly it is. It's at minimum it's deism, but it's very obviously modeled after Christianity as a way to essentially prey on people. Is essentially preying on people who are at their lowest, who are not who are having issues with their faculties and finding the right balance. I think it's quite predatory and awful. And then of course it's not like this is one of many tools. Like if that's something that's assigned to you, you're supposed to go through that program and you follow those steps in that order, and it's not like you say this isn't going to work for me, I'd rather try a different form of treatment. It's like, no, that's the one the judge told you to do. So I think so. I'm not gonna quabble with her going against AA because that's fair enough. But yeah, basically this is about this show, or is it a movie called what's it called? Promising Young Woman, and she says that what is it? So in the character has okay, she seeks revenge on men who violate overserved women. I think by overserved, I think she means like women who have been served too much to drink. Yeah. It's a nice way of saying drunk women. Okay, overserved women because her best friend committed suicide after being sexual assaulted by fellow students at a boozed up party. So here's what's fascinating though. She also talks about how booze was the lubricant in this patriarchal violence because it allowed men and bystanders to claim innocence and instead blame women for their own victimization.
I love that she said men and bystanders. Like,
I know that's an interesting thing, right? Like, well, bystanders. Surely she doesn't mean the female bystanders, right?
But do you say male bystanders or the men or the bystanders? You can just say men and bystanders and only include men in the bystander and only include bystander in the men. It's like that makes sense.
I think this was subconscious for two reasons. The first reason is that in her mind, gender is not a binary, right? So if you use a gendered term, you have to include a non-gendered term just to make sure you include all the non-Bs, right? Or all the NBs as they call them.
Yeah, but then she's literally like targeting saying that all the made up non-NBs like are also at fault for doing all this. Which is and if you would say male or male bystander, then she wouldn't do that, which is kind of funny to me.
Yeah, this is subtle though, right? Because a bystander is like a particular class. So then, like, if you were in that situation but feel you were not close enough or whatever, like you weren't a bystander, you had no idea, right? Whereas a bystander means like a particular thing. So I think that's so it's safe that way. But then the second way, is that yeah, she needs to include a gender neutral term because she's definitely not going to include a female one. So. Men and bystanders.
Yeah, but in reality, there are only like men and women, so she's actually kind of stupid for just like pretending that things that don't exist.
But okay, here's what's. I mean, this is a little bit of beating a dead horse, but this is such a neatly condensed bit of so many of the hypocrisies surrounding this topic that I think it is worth deconstructing a little bit. So, point one. So the men and the bystanders, they do have a moral obligation, right, to intervene. All right. Otherwise, they are a bystander. They have a positive moral duty And presumably they have this moral duty because they chose to be in a space where this thing is happening. Presumably, right, that this is either a party where people are drinking and you're there, therefore it's now you've accepted this moral responsibility. Because they are not innocent, right? It's not that they are like not not guilty, right? They cannot claim innocence because they had an obligation, right? So that's clear enough, right? Um, this obligation does not clearly apply to female bystanders, but I guess we can infer that by being charitable. But then, of course, there's a lessening of the moral agency on the part of women drinking, right? They're not women who drink too much. They were overserved, right? So because if you work in a restaurant that serves alcohol, you're in a situation where alcohol is being served, you know that there's a point where you cut people off when they're too drunk, right? And of course, because of this, anytime you have a situation where a person says, "Oh, I drank too much," particularly a woman, they can characterize themselves or be characterized by others as overserved, right? She just sat there and just drank what was served to her, and it's not her fault that she was given too much, right?
That's actually something that Karen Strawn said when she basically explained how this like genocidal misandrist are that because of feminist rhetoric. She basically just explained that you can quote her. Women, they don't even have female privilege. They have benevolent sexism that is imposed on them. That's how not at fault they are. Which is actually really good characterization of feminist rhetoric is, because it literally is that women are never responsible for anything they do or anything anybody does, but men are always responsible for everything all people do all the time. Like if a man he drinks too much, but a woman, she's overserved, and like a man, he got into a fight, but a woman just defended herself. Like they basically said is like whenever it's like someone does anything, right? Women always like never do it. They're never actors. They're always objects, right? And then these feminists like ᴅʀᴇᴍ, they basically just say that they are not the opposing team. They're the ball. They basically say that they basically project that all society is the way that women have no agency because of what they believe.
Yeah, oh, and that's hitting the nail on the head because that's exactly what I was gonna say on that is that she's objectifying women, and she's doing it in a very distinctly feminist way because rather than objectifying women in a sexual sense, right, where the woman is objectified in a way that's she's an animate human object, right, that's interested in what she's doing, right, and pleased and all these kind of good things in general, right? I mean, maybe a little bit little bit lewd, right, or whatever. So that's a form of objectification, mixed bag, you might say. But then her objectification is just as an inanimate object where things just happen to them and they're only useful or relevant once they're victims because it gives them more power. Like
Yeah.
Like that's I don't know, I guess who's the real rapist, right, lady? I mean,
But then they basically have to like make sure that all women are not at fault for their actions anywhere. Like if a woman, that's why they say that's why they're so pro-choice, right? Not like, oh, if you get pregnant by accident you can abort. They say no because like she just like that happened to her, right? I basically Bane666 made a video where a woman basically said that women are never responsible for pregnancies. Never, right? It's always men responsible, right? Even if she gets pregnant by herself by using other people's sperm, it's always man's fault because men ejaculated, so therefore there were sperm in the world that she could use. So therefore they went her pregnant. Therefore they're responsible and not she is. Like she basically made this statement with a straight face. All the time a woman gets pregnant, it's always 100% the man's choice. Man's responsibility and man's doing. It's never the woman being responsible for that anywhere, ever.
yeah, well, so the plot of the show, right, is this woman, because her friend, was raped when she was drunk, and ended up committing suicide, because suicide's a women's issue, obviously.
Oh yeah, that's it more.
Yeah,
that's
of
what
course.
it's.
So they're highlighting multiple issues. This is really really heavy, good commentary they got. So because of that, she's getting revenge on the rape culture of bars and alcohol, right? So what she does is she pretends to be drunk, right, to see if she can find men who will take advantage of her. But what I wonder immediately with this premise is like, what if they can just like kind of tell she's not really drunk? You know what I mean? Like, what if she's not a good actress that doesn't seem like convincingly drunk, and they just think she's kind of quirky or weird. I suppose there's like obvious enough things you could do, right? And I'm sure the show or movie, whatever this thing is, depicts it that way. But then she texts them, "You made a really bad call, bro," which presumably, I guess, precedes her some sort of like revenge or whatever. Which seems like a bad idea, because then you got like a text of premeditation and a motive. Should they suspect you do anything? But you know, pussy pass. So yeah, we really got a bingo sheet of women's issues in this just stupid solipsistic shit show of an article. But yeah, again, I think, and then of course it bears repeating, the overall issue that this is being addressed here is women choosing to drink alcohol, right? So even
No,
on
it's
this
not.
big issue
Basically,
itself, like even
women
that
are.
is something where it's like, okay, well, fundamentally, like women are making this choice, right? You'd think that would be a logical starting point, or at least a place you'd stop somewhere along your journey here. But
Well,
that does not
if
seem
you
to be in the
use
cards.
like if you use like normal logic, you would say that, of course. But then we need to use feminist logic, and that is that how basically like one feminist. I don't know who said it. I'm not going to quote anybody because I don't know who said it. But she basically said that in a patriarchal society, women are not powerful to give meaningful consent. And Karen basically said, I don't know if that's like, if I find it disturbing, most disturbing because of his misogyny or because of his misandry, right?
Oh yeah, that's
Because
the
like,
all P and V is rape argument. The
yeah,
feminist
and that's like
classic.
they're not strong enough to give consent in a patriarchy, right? And that's like what she's going for in this article, I think, because like if she, for example, were to like you need to go with that standard, because otherwise she would have to admit the women can actually be responsible for their own actions, and she don't admit that. She only believes it is other people making her drunk. It's not she deciding to get drunk.
Nope, she was overserved.
Yep.
I can't wait till the next time I'm just like out of control, like shit show crazy drunk, and then somebody calls me out on it. Then I can just say, "Fuck you, I'm overserved." Or do you have
Well,
to
no
be
one gonna
a?
take us seriously because we want to win.
I want to be
It's only if you're a woman you
overserved.
can make it. We don't have female privilege.
That should be a sassy T-shirt. I'm not drunk. I'm overserved.
You should sell that on your merchandise if you're Shannon.
I should make a merch store, and it's gonna be all based on really sassy things that emotionally intelligent women say, and I'm gonna market it to them, and then that way my channel will be funded by like the worst people.
That's so funny, because these are the people who want to take your tax monies by force, so them giving it back to you is only fair.
Hell yeah.
Do you think this kind of thing is maybe why we used to, and like this isn't a rhetorical point or anything, I'm genuinely asking, do you think this is why we used to have, among other reasons obviously, only having sex in the context of marriage as like an idealized social norm? That is, that being the only kind of sex that was considered socially acceptable, assuming that marriage is like fit for purpose, obviously, which it isn't in 2021, but you know what I mean.
Well, it
Yeah, I
certainly
can agree with
clears
that,
up a lot
but
of shit. Like, it clears up a lot of potential crimes and accusations and stuff that's, like, literally impossible to fucking prove. So, that's one aspect of it, right?
no, I actually do agree. Like that's just the reason why I, for example, why I would never like why I don't want to have sex. Like I think that it's primarily something you do within marriage. So that's why I'm not having sex at the moment.
Yeah.
Because if you're gay, you can always have sex if you want to. That's like all androsexuals can always get sex all the time. There is no such thing as fem cells. They don't exist, right? If you're androsexual, you can get sex all the time, no exception, right? That's just how it is. I'm sorry, but it's just a fact. It's really hard to like.
Right.
debunk that. You
So
can't.
with you, it is a moral issue then. Only is the reason that you're doing it.
Well, it's also more like a practical issue, because I think a society where more people have that, the idea that I have, would be like better, because there were less abortion, less people born into wedlock, and less rape accusations. It will like clear up a lot of problems with society, and less STDs. which means that people cannot use that as a reason why you should pay more money to like the government. So I guess it's a moral reason, but it's just because it's practical too.
This is so obviously I agree with I mean, this is a separate issue obviously, but I agree with all the MGTOW arguments about why marriage isn't a great idea for men in 2021 for all the standard reasons, marriage not being fit for its original purpose because of the laws. But if that were not the case, then obviously I would support those social norms. That is sex only happening within the context of marriage. Well, let's see. Yes, I think so. And on a related note, I've been thinking more about sort of the steel man for arguments from tradition. Because sort of the grug-brained way of thinking about it is just it worked for my grandparents, so it'll work for me. And there's not a lot to that. It's not terribly intelligent. But then that's the reason. Sorry?
You have like proof of concept in history.
Yeah, well, the reason we have these social norms is that it's supposed to keep people on the straight and narrow, even if the individual people in question aren't very smart. And I think with arguments from tradition, it's like, okay, so there are obvious exceptions with things like, the movements of the stars, or like whether the Earth is at the center of the universe or the sun, as opposed to, the positions of celestial objects and so on. That's not something that any of our ancestors had direct experience with or knowledge of, and not something that you'd expect them to build social norms around. But when it comes to things like human nature and whether or not there's such a thing as an inherited human nature, even before we knew anything about genetics, and male and female nature and the relationships between the sexes and so on. In that case, those are things that our ancestors had constant direct experience with. And, for thousands of generations of human history. And they had to streamline all of these social norms. And it's why, so with the obvious exceptions, like I said, religion was obviously popular just because, people didn't know better, and, the church was treated as the unquestioned authority and whatever. But when it comes to these issues of just human relationships and what sorts of social norms that can stem from that, there is a value in folk wisdom and the traditions that were set down, obviously. And it's why sometimes I think of saying to a feminist, do you not realize that by being a feminist you're saying that literally all your ancestors, from the beginning of time, were wrong about the relationships between the sexes? Maybe it really is the case that you're so much wiser than them, despite the fact that and this is another aspect to it as well, they lived in a world where they actually had to work to live, not just work to avoid going on welfare or something. They had to actually work to survive and avoid getting hideous diseases that would kill you in your 20s, like tuberculosis and whatever. So they couldn't afford to be romantic or to have ideas that were clearly at odds with reality. So that's basically Steelman version of arguments from tradition.
That makes sense to me. But I just wanted to add to the whole idea of marriage. I think I do agree that marriage, how it is today in law, isn't very good. Therefore, the idea that you shouldn't have sex out of marriage, that could be translated: you should not have sex outside of long-term stable relationships, if that makes sense. It doesn't have to be marriage. That's a far more logical. That's basically my standards too. Actually, I'm not interested in having sex with someone that haven't been in a relationship with long-term in a stable one. Because that's far more better standard to hold, but it's basically the same.
Marriage is just the legal codification of what you were just saying, but it's not necessary. Yeah, I agree.
I think one way you could look at this is that like we talk about traditional or ancestral knowledge, or whatever, and we think of it as kind of just like one thing. But I think that when people are discrediting traditionalism, typically what they're doing is they're going to discredit what people of the past thought in terms of like specific hard sciences, right? They'll say, oh well, they were wrong about astronomy, and they were wrong about this, and they're
Yeah, but
yeah.
I just addressed that, like the
No, that's
difference.
what I mean. Yeah, that's what I'm getting to, right? Because that's usually the reason people will discount it. And I think when you like there's sort of a way of saying, well, let's think about what ancestral knowledge is. Is it going to be largely based on knowledge of the stars and knowledge of specific hard sciences and calculus or whatever? Or is it going to be based on the soft sciences, social sciences, and humans and how they interact and everything? And actually
Yeah.
economics too. Human economics, I would put in that category. All of those things would, right, have practicalities kind of coded into them. And it's kind of funny because this seems like a pretty easy distinction to make. You just kind of imagine it, right? It seems pretty obvious. Like, is this a class of thing that people would have needed to survive, 100, 200 years ago, whatever?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and that becomes pretty straightforward. So I guess I could see that as a way, right? But then I'm a little bit cautious that this just sets a traditionalist up to create just so stories, right? Like you can just kind of imagine, well, like because there's no specific claim. They're not saying our tradition specifically encouraged this behavior, and that led to this good outcome that's been working for us, and this is the only real practical way to maintain and reinforce that. That would be kind of like a general example of like a structure you'd need, right? But often the causal link is kind of ignored because there's this mysterious nature to the ancestral knowledge. So so then it becomes a little bit of a leap of faith, and you can kind of see both sides of it, that something can work
Well,
without you understanding why it works.
that's the reason. I agree with you, and obviously I agree that we have to be careful about just accepting these kinds of just stories as on faith, kind of taken on faith. But I think the reason that we have social norms is so that dumb people, basically, like the lowest common denominator of society, doesn't fuck things up too much, basically, because they don't have the mental, cognitive, furniture to sit and work through all of these things, like, intellectually, philosophically. So, to the average grug brain, it just becomes a matter of like, I'll do it the way my grandparents did it, because it worked for them. End of story. And that works fine for, the average person.
Yeah, and that's why I think that if we're gonna talk about like social values, or what a civilization, as a whole, or any kind of collective endeavor, I think that basically the welfare of children, I think, would be the primary. I suppose, yeah, that would be the means of judging society, is how does it treat its children.
Yeah. And obviously there are, just for the sake of completeness, there are other distinctions that you can make between the past and now. So one reason why I don't think traditional gender roles, at least traditional gender roles in any sense that our ancestors would recognize, right, are possible in 2021, is because of basically technological determinism. The fact that we have all these household utilities that have basically devalued work in that kind of domain, I guess, stay-at-home work, and all sorts of other reasons. The fact that it just isn't technically necessary for the sake of children for women to stay at home anymore, and we have contraception and all this, and that's why you can justify a more lax attitude towards gender roles based on technological change, but that isn't going to change sort of like for lack of a better word, the raw feels of human relationships, and like all these issues of like sexual indiscretion and how like women have an inherently different psychological way of dealing with that than men have, and all these things, and that's why we have all this hysteria about well, drunk sex and so on. So I think that's like a domain where traditionalism does still apply and would still produce good solutions. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think it is important to kind of flip the expectation, just because so many people who advocate for, smashing the gender binary, um, it's because they don't see any usefulness in it, right? Um, and I think very often people who are in the traditionalist camps, very sincere traditionalists, their response to things, it tends to be kind of an EU factor dismissal. And I think that this more kind of secular approach to re-examining traditionalism, could lead to more instances where you explain to people like, here's the value of it. But again, I
Yeah.
guess that is an idealistic approach, right? An ideas based approach, which is going to be always limited.
I mean,
But
one question that is interesting, just based on social messaging, I guess, it's kind of hard to say um, how many or what percentage of women actually would want to be full-time stay-at-home parents if that was presented as an idealized social norm. Because, like, it really isn't in modern society. I don't really like, well, it's just the average person is kind of just indifferent to it, and the social messaging is fairly indifferent to it, I guess. But I don't, if say 70% of women or whatever, something like that, want to do it, I don't really see a moral problem with that. If men are willing to support them doing that, and that's like, I guess, the other issue that you have to take into consideration is just men's consent to support that kind of lifestyle, I guess. But I mean, I never really got into this with Toto. This is like, I guess, a disagreement I have with him. He's always like, we need to encourage women to be more efficient, educated professionals and so on, and start like filling out the same sorts of roles that men do. And he sees that as a real like moral imperative. Just to be clear, like, I don't care either way really what happens. No doubt there are some women who want to do that sort of thing and take it seriously. That is, take on male sorts of roles, and are serious about the responsibility that entails and so on. But I don't understand why he sees it as this like strong moral imperative to basically turn women into men. Like, I don't get it.
yeah, well, I would question how strong the position is, because I have some sympathy towards it, but I wouldn't characterize it as like a big like a major project. Well, one thing that I always like to remind people is, we always look at the apex 100% most competitive standard, but I mean, in reality and by definition, you don't need that, right? Like, you just kind of need to be average. And even if you're below average, you can be fine, right? And like, the question isn't, are women capable of filling all of the roles that men do in the workforce just as efficiently, right? But it's like, well, they could do a lot more. And honestly, if you under under a market incentive program, they'd be paid just fine, and it would work out, you know, just fine, because we've automated so many things. But I don't really see like an imperative to rush or force that. But at the same time, I will say, the more women you have that step into roles like that successfully, the more you might see a more egalitarian attitude regarding things like employment discrimination, or whatever it might be.
But like, it would be kind of hard to like have a more egalitarian approach to anything when humans
I
are
want
like
to
almost.
clarify what is just before we move on, I want you to like, what would an egalitarian approach to employer discrimination be?
What I
Like
mean is
that.
abolishing affirmative action for women, basically.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I
But
guess
like,
some women are already opposed to that nominally anyway, whether or not they'd
Nominally.
actually be prepared to. Yeah.
like
Emphasis on the nominally. That should be a thing. Asterisk nominally.
Yeah.
like it's very useful to use term nominally when it comes to basically everything. And use it and because it's very much like applicable. Almost all like very often it's really fucking funny, and also kind of sad. But like the thing I wanted to say about about this whole deal is that affirmative action is basically one thing. Affirmative action, when it comes to the government, when it comes to legally enforced affirmative action, right? That is literally charging people for a service and then not letting them access the service, and then not letting them access the service they're being charged for, right? So therefore, if you basically believe this affirmative action is justified, you believe that armed robbery is justified.
Well, and what else is fascinating, right, is the way that they justify the selective treatment is based on the broad history of the people who they're targeting, even though that history doesn't actually include their own agency, right? This is the history of how they came into being. And you might see where I'm going with this. It ties into the abortion discussion we had earlier, where, under the pro-choice stance, you think that there should be an importance to history, right? But in this case, like, you would actually, I don't know, maybe this is a stretch, right? But can you be pro-choice if you acknowledge the importance of people's history regarding whether or not they're a valid target, right? Like, you can see how this directs goes straight into eugenic abortions based on like racial or sexual preferences. Or I should say,
Like, main reason why I
sex
justify
preference.
abortion is because of the racial and mainly political affiliation of the woman getting abortions.
Right.
And so,
Well,
like, if you,
yeah. That's the reason. It's all a shit show. That's completely inconsistent. It's
well,
because
that's the
women are
reason
at
I
the
don't
heart
go
of it.
against it as
Yeah.
much as I would. If it was like neutral when it comes to politics, or even not just politics but also values, right? And racial stuff, right? When it comes to abortion, right? Then if all these things, like, if the people that were different races, like different political and different values, weren't having abortion much more than people are like me in those ways, then if that wasn't the case, then probably have more of an issue with it than it is now. But now, because of that fact, and I don't really see a reason to ban it, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
A lot of people would
It
probably
is-
crucify me for saying that, but it's what I
It is
actually think.
also, it's interesting how, like, I'm trying to think of what the steelman case for feminism would be, because feminism, like, if you want to just come up with like a sentence-long definition that actually adheres to reality and isn't based on ideology or whatever, it's basically just what happens when you put a group of people who are very security conscious, let's call it, i.e., women, into a social and technological environment where there aren't any native, at least, threats to their security, and like a machine learning algorithm trying to find patterns in white noise, because there are no real native threats to their security, their complaints just become more and more absurd and strange. And in the West, it seems that this is like, if you look at the last 20 years, since feminism has like really come into the mainstream as an ideology, all they can really do is like make an issue of things that people didn't care about 20 years ago. So, like, just to give an example of what I mean by that, if you ask a Western feminist, a feminist in Britain or America, any Western country, what are the salient issues relating to feminism where they live that are actually relevant to their lives, they'll list things like, I don't know, catcalling or something like that, or, just sort of vague things about harassment.
The
Which,
not like other girls
also,
trope. They might list the not like other girls trope.
yeah, right. So what I
No,
was getting
no,
at,
oh
like,
please, no.
the thing is that, like, it's something like, just as an example, like catcalling or sexual harassment. Those things obviously did exist 20 years ago, but the difference is in like the framing. The ideology changed it from, just something that happens that's maybe an annoyance, not something that's seen as like indicative of male depravity, or like they weren't seen as like systemic issues. And then in the 2010s, with the leftist cultural hegemony, all of these things just became that were just kind of like a part of life, were rebranded as systemic social issues. And that's what feminism basically, well, it's all it can do now is take things that used to be considered normal 20 years ago, or whatever, or if not normal, then at least like not a systemic issue, and then making them into a systemic social problem with like ideological gibberish. And respectable people, the only thing they can come up with in terms of real women's issues is to point at foreign countries, which is even that's becoming increasingly dubious. Because even if you look at a place as religiously conservative as Saudi Arabia, they have a below growth rate now, so they really can't be that religiously conservative. So it's just becoming like a stupider and stupider gravy train / money laundering racket.
Yeah, I really hate when people say, "Oh, but feminist." They basically claim feminism like it's so like, oh, it's needed, like in a third world like Saudi Arabia. And I'm like, no, it fucking isn't. And that's the reason why people who say that they changed, like Hunter Avalon, didn't fucking change, because he always believed all this bullshit, stupid stuff that he believes now. It's totally different. And that's really why I really like when people like the honey badgers, also Blair White, when they basically said that the men that live in like Islamic countries, right, are also oppressed because of their gender.
Yeah, I really
Like-
impressed
That's
honey
what really works
badgers.
in women.
Honey badgers especially, you give them props for holding that line, because they had a whole bunch of people who, were within the anti-feminism manosphere area that were, they were jumping ship, and they were causing a lot of drama over them keeping to that stance. I think in particular it was I think Based Mama had a real big problem with maybe it was her. I could be mistaken. Maybe I shouldn't name particular people, although she hasn't been around for a very long time. Do you guys remember that whole thing where they had the whole Kilroy convention, and it ended up being a
Oh
massive
yeah, I
shit
did. She
show?
basically fucked it all up. She basically made a gag order, and then people didn't want to do it because of that. Everybody was like, "Why did you want?" And then they said, "Well, because of this gag order." And they were like, "What the fuck?" And then basically, the other people that were involved with her, they basically didn't want to be involved anymore because it went to shit just because of that idea. She just had, if you didn't do that, then it would never have been a problem, right? And that's just because she was like so fucking incompetent. And
Yeah, and I think people made probably a bigger deal of it than what it was, but you can kind of see how it. But anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent. But
do
yeah,
you,
anyway, I agree on that point though, that it's becoming harder and harder to make that case. Although they rely enough on ignorance that I don't know how optimistic we can be that
yeah.
that it's gonna stop.
Do you just like I'm probably being like needlessly self-critical maybe, but like, do you sort of agree with me about like the way the money laundering racket seems to work now in the West is like they'll take something that nobody cared about 20 years ago, or not even that, actually even 10 years ago, and then they'll just decide, right, this is going to be a thing now. This is going to be a serious systemic issue because we've decided to call it that now.
Well,
That's
okay. The one thing I would change to that is I think that they have to identify the issue that is the potential for them to shape it to be the thing, right? Like they couldn't just choose anything. That has to be like an issue that's kind of situated in the right way.
Yes.
Also, I wanted to note that I have a theory. I think that this is probably where fibromyalgia comes from.
But before you say that, I just have to say that I need to go because I need to eat now.
Well, yeah, and also I was gonna wrap this stream up pretty soon here. I just wanted to make sure that we had kind of let the conversation, stretch its legs appropriately.
Yeah,
but
that's good. But bye everyone for now. It was really lovely to be on.
yeah, thanks for dropping on as usual. And I'll schedule another one for I think same time next week, because this time still works for me, but I'm supposed to be getting a job soon, so maybe I might have to change it around a little, but we'll see.
Oh well.
I think yeah, but I'll finish reading Rats of Nationalism for next week.
Yeah.
It is really
It really,
short. I should have finished it. I procrastinated so much, but I like what I've read of it so far.
yeah, it tells you a lot that feds are willing to infiltrate something as innocuous as like a small art exhibition in the middle of rural nowhere. Obviously, Phoenix is a city, but as cities go, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. I have a feeling maybe he moved out there to sort of get away from all this, from politics, or because I don't think he's lived there all his life. But yeah, it just goes to show the amount of money and resources that the oligarchs have in our society, money and power more or less being functionally equivalent and so on. And it's also just like uh, uh, puts the lie to these kinds of people like tradcaths who say, we need a religious ideology to sort of push back against the establishment's ideology, even though the churches in the modern West are like some of the loudest proponents of basically leftism and progressivism, universalism, however you want to say it, and they're controlled by all of the same moneyed interests, global capital. I think that is basically what it comes down to. Ryan Falk had this video a while ago where he basically examined voter influence on policy recommendations.
Yeah,
And,
I remember this. Yeah, he went through the list of them and pointed out because people I think were pointing to the list and saying, "Oh, look, all of these Jewish organizations are reporting it or supporting these immigration efforts," and he's like, "Well, look, like it's mostly Christian ones."
yeah, political lobbying from global capital basically is what runs the whole show, which does include a fair number of Jews, but also some like post-Christian, like universalist whites in significant numbers.
Yeah, well, the thing
None
that
of
always
which,
just comes back to me is just I
yeah,
remember arguing with this woman who's a Christian, and I said, like your religion says you should give charitably. It doesn't say you should impose a welfare system on others, and you shouldn't force your religion on me just because your Jesus is pro charity, right? And she just like laughed at it, like and she's a lawyer, right? So she understands the argument is it's freaking simple. And like that's just what I think of when I think of all the liberal Christians, right? Which is half of them. So yeah, that's always the thing that sticks out to me whenever people say, "Oh, we need to have a religious underpinning to make these things work." It's like, well, I mean, a state is a theocracy fundamentally, right? So it already is that by definition. But then like the religion, as in practice, as the proof is in the pudding, like it hasn't stopped these things that you're complaining about now. Clearly, it didn't work. Maybe the Orthodox Christians have a slightly stronger um, defense point, right? Because if you're Catholics and Protestants, forget about it, right? But maybe the Orthodoxes, but I would still be quite suspicious
yeah,
of them.
and it's like it's a different type of people, obviously, as well, since they're mostly from Eastern Europe and North Asia.
Yeah.
But it's like, the message of the churches is ultimately still processed by the institutions that we're always complaining about. That they're still subject to elite theory and the ideology of the ruling elite, the ruling class, and religion is as much a reflection of that as anything else. And as we've discussed before, those elite structures, which determine the fabric of society, are themselves determined by um, genetic qualities. You know, Europeans tend to be more universalist than typical, especially Western Europeans. So you get democracy, notions of civil society, and so on. Whereas in West Asia, basically the Middle East, you get these theocracies and just a different understanding of life in general. And I think it is important to emphasize that there is obviously a difference between the interests of the elite and our interests. So a lot of it is signaling. Like, that's why white liberals who espouse anti-white ideologies in terms of their mating and migratory behaviors, if you want to sort of use the ornithological phrases to be funny, are no different from any other type of white person. And it's also why you see things like polling data from Britain showing that, like 70% of British people don't like demographic change as it stands right now, because it's like universalism. You can argue about what the ultimate moral implications of universalism are, like loosening of ethnic ties or even of racial ties, like just the conception of those things as an important set of categories. But I don't think there can be any argument that the ethnomasochism and basically the self-hatred, ethnic self-hatred, and the out-group preference that is expected of whites is very much an engineered outcome from a highly selected, hyper-universalist, autistic set of elites who expect this as an idealized social norm. But I think when push comes to shove, if there were to be like a societal meltdown or new societies forming, these normies would basically just come back to what's natural to them in this regard. And you can argue the case from multiple other issues to what extent it's just a function of imposed influence. Like, I don't think feminism is really in the same category. I think feminism is kind of just what happens, for all the reasons that I talked about before.
It occurs with the passage of time.
Yeah, but it is also useful to the elite in the same way. It sort of serves a useful function, or many people would argue so.
Yeah, so there's no reason to not use it. Well, and I suppose anytime you look at any like cross section of people and you see this maladaptive behavior, right? That's like it stands to reason that didn't arise organically, right? And basically, the two explanations I can think of is the one you just described, right? Which is this is elite influences, because obviously their interests are not the same interests, and they have powers and abilities to change things around. So why wouldn't they? And then the only other one I can think of would be just very dramatic technological changes, which aren't sensitive to the way that our brains are set up, right? Which junk food is probably the easiest example of that. You could see that like, oh, this behavior of our eating habits is now maladaptive, and that's one that you could tie to, or at least partially explained by just the way that we've changed how our food is being produced and processed and things like that. But then, of course, with this whole, racial outgroup preference and what did you call it? Like racial masochism, ethnomasochism. That was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't think of a technological explanation for that so much. Which would then kind of leaves a lot to the conspiratorial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's clearly an engineered outcome, is basically what I was getting at. Yeah.
Well, and then the other argument too that kind of led into this idea that religion is just another one of the things they can use. If you think about what is it that causes a person to have their religious ideas, it's just that, right? It's a process that's kind of in your head, right? You're thinking of things, you have specific propositions, you're deciding some are true on one basis or another. It's highly like an idealistic and mental process that's happening, and so much of this elite theory and their influence is based on setting up, or at least playing into dominant ideas, right? So it just stands to reason like they manipulate the precise thing that religion kind of arises from.
Yeah, and it's compatible with a genetically determinist view if you that is elite theory is if you just repackage it in a slightly different way, although not in a way that's like just sophistry or some just trying to make things fit for the sake of a narrative. It makes sense, which is that people have a natural inherited sort of a strong instinct to well, basically to follow trends and to follow perceived authorities and their social norms. Like, there's obvious, like, evolutionary precedent for it, going all the way back to the time when, when we were primates, you've always had, like, the leaders in society and the followers who basically just follow and don't do a whole lot of thinking. And there's a small minority of people, which would include us, for instance, who are just of a disposition, again, genetically, because of our personalities, that we're less susceptible to authority and more willing to question it.
Right, yeah. I guess, yeah, that's... Because you see the leader-follower distinction made all the time. They don't really mention dissidents often as a third position there.
Yeah. Like, it's not some thing that you need to construct any kind of, like, narrative to be able to see it. Like, it's obvious, it just pops right out at you if you just observe most people's behavior.
Well, and also, though, wouldn't the so-called leaders, wouldn't they just be the dissidents if they didn't happen to have the power? Or maybe that is a fundamentally different personality type.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I guess I would lean toward the latter explanation, but maybe that's something to keep on the back burner and chew on a little bit. There's a couple of amusing comments in the chat, though. Roosh is my source for Orthodox Christianity. I think that's perfect. Did you see when Roosh did his interview with Blonde in the Belly of the Beast? I don't know if you I don't know if you watched that at all, but
Did you say when he did his interview with Blonde in the Belly of the Beast?
Yeah.
I think I saw the thumbnail, but I chose not to watch it.
Yeah, like I watched her show a couple of times, but as she advertised, it's very much focused on like pregnancy and stuff like that. So, for me, the relevance is a little bit limited. But I kind of appreciate anything she does, though, to a degree. But that was a good interview, actually. Her and her friend with Roosh. It was just kind of an amusing snapshot, right? Of because Roosh transitioning from the whole infamous PUA to to this, now he's like wholesome and Christian. It's basically the whole trad thought, post wall meme, right? But he's a man, so it's quite funny, I think.
Heard some people saying that he'd gone like MGTOW or something for a little bit, or
kinda.
I guess that was like just well, when people say that he was a MGTOW, I think really what they mean is just like he'd stopped doing the PUA thing, but I guess still had many of those same attitudes that like shared in common, I guess, between PUAs and MGTOWs as regards women or whatever, before he became a Christian, but like he never identified as MGTOW or anything. It was just like an attitudinal thing.
Well, and that's the thing though, is with MGTOW, like I don't personally identify as a MGTOW because I just don't think that's a useful application of the label. But obviously I identify as like a MGTOW supporter. But I think that a lot of people within the manosphere, even ones that hate MGTOW, if you present to them, the basic premises of it, anybody who should be taken seriously within the manosphere has to grant that. I feel like it's just a basic understanding, right? And then you'd have PUAs who say, yep, I understand all of the risks and everything that you're talking about, and I agree that you're correct, but the value proposition of pussy is still good enough that I'm willing to go through all that risk, right? And that's in theory, a consistent position that a person could have, right? They'd be a PUA that's a non-MGTOW that basically agrees with the entire body of a MGTOW perspective. And I guess the only people I would exclude from that would be, I don't know, I guess kind of more coffee shop anti-feminist egalitarians, right? Who are also kind of paradoxically coffee shop traditionalists. They're all of those things at once. It's quite a funny blend. It's a lot of things that should be interesting, right? And should be in opposition. And when you put it all together, it's just the most milquetoast position. It's the walk away campaign all over again.
Although it's there is, I was gonna say about that actually, there is this phenomenon of things starting to become more polarized, because, like, so the people that you're calling coffee shop anti-feminists, most of them aren't anymore, from what I've observed. Like, it used to be the case that the go-to example of someone like that was ⴅᴇᴇᴍ, except she's not really that anymore. She's like a leftist now, or Hunter Avalon would be, well, self-identified. The same with Hunter Avalon, who was another like sort of coffee shop anti-feminist type of a person. And the reason that this has happened is because the more moderate voices on the right, like the people who are sort of halfway between conservative Inc. and us, I guess. Well, maybe that's not exactly the right way to characterize it, but you know what I mean, though. ⴂᴇᴇᴍ is a good example. Those people have drifted towards, well, adopting similar rhetoric to, well, frankly speaking, ethno-nationalists. Like the whole discourse around global capital and like finance capitalism and well, racial IQ differences, that sort of thing, has become more mainstream among people that would have just been sort of normie-con-ish people a few years ago. Like Paul Joseph Watson and ⴂᴇᴍ are both aware of all those things now, and ⴂᴇᴍ is like at least willing to speak about those sorts of things. And this has caused sort of a hilarious and autistic sort of allergic reaction from these self-styled centrist type people who are just desperate, so very desperate to be seen as good people and right-thinking and bien-pensant and however you want to say it. So they've converted to leftism.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the thing is that they were never really in it from any kind of logical or principled standpoint. It was ultimately a moral ew factor. It was like a fundamental kind of a gut revulsion, which was the basis of that's kind of what I found to be the common denominator.
I mean, the thing about that is, like, what you're describing, just the two figures that popped to mind immediately, like Hunter Avalon and ⴂᴇᴍ, formerly coffee shop anti-feminists, now, like, whatever, who cares? What you're describing is definitely true of Hunter Avalon. Like, he even basically admitted this himself, that he just sort of, when he was a, quote, conservative, he just sort of parroted the superficial talking points of conservatives without actually understanding any of the arguments. But I don't think this can also be said of ⴂᴇᴍ, at least as it pertains to gender issues, because it seemed like, she was interviewed on HBR and acquainted with that milieu with MRAs and like friends with a lot of them for a long time, which means she understands like all of the like sophisticated aspects of this stuff, that is, of gender issues that don't normally get talked about in the mainstream or the mainstream like feminist versus anti-feminist discourse. So she is aware of all this shit, but it's just like a personality type where she doesn't care, like, even though she's been exposed to all this knowledge and doesn't have a meaningful refutation of it at all. She's ultimately just more concerned with being seen as one of the right
cute
thinking
cute uwu bean e-girl. So
yeah,
small,
something
so
like
small, and so young, and so youthful, and so funny.
Even though she's like 30 or whatever.
Yeah, 30-year-olds are old. Well, this I wasn't gonna bring it up, but I've been thinking of making a video of it, but I was kind of on the fence, the whole Benjamin Boyce thing, because I feel like it's a lot of unnecessary drama, but
the real shame of it,
it was
I mean,
unexpected and disappointing. I thought it was unexpected and disappointing.
Drama isn't automatically bad. Like, drama is sometimes interesting, and what's interesting about this, or instructive, I guess, is that he is a person with actual intelligence who's like willing to hear out controversial people. Like he interviewed James Cantor, for instance, on the so-called paedophilia issue. So he's willing to touch that issue and take it seriously, but he's not willing to talk to MRAs, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, so I guess for anyone who I guess missed it or well last week now, let me go ahead and just find the tweet. The tweet itself, I guess, is kind of mild, but basically, he was just saying that he what avoids discussing men's issues when he talks about gender, because the MRAs that get attracted by such conversation are just so toxic. They're just awful, awful, toxic people. Where is that tweet? I thought I put it somewhere in the Discord.
I mean,
My
the
goodness.
the sort of the stock. I mean, I know. I think you'll agree with this characterization for the most part. There are a lot of MRAs who are very angry, but that's not inherently a bad thing. Like there is such a thing as righteous anger. It's like it's weird when you get these people who are like, oh, I don't want to associate with anybody who's angry. It's like, what other psychological, emotional faculties that have evolved over hundreds of millions of years in evolution and like serve a serious moral function? Like, you know, the emotion of anger obviously exists for a reason. You become righteously angry at injustice. And then the question is like an intellectual question about whether or not there actually is an injustice, right? But it's just saying such and such a group of people is angry, therefore you shouldn't hear them out or take them seriously is just so cringeworthy and gay.
Right. Well, the thing is, though, so, okay, I have the tweet here, and there's just a couple things. Like, the obvious thing about it, right, is he's doing a series on gender, I guess, right? And he's not including men's issues. I get pressured to add men's rights issues to my gender series, and it's a fair point and topic to cover. Like, yeah, I mean, that would be half of it minimum, right? All things being equal, that would be half of it. But I frankly don't want the audience that's attracted to that content, especially considering the disrespectful schlubbery that gets addended to my conversations with women, right? So the implication here, right, is anytime he has a conversation with women, all of these angry neckbeards just have to ruin it all. But for context, the conversation, this was one I think I had linked to because I just listened to it, or I was just starting to listen to it, and right within the first couple of minutes, you know, these women are whinging about trans athletes and how awful this is for women because these women are going to be denied these scholarships based on athletics, and of course, it you know, like if they want to play the sports, that's something they lose in its own right, right? This is a horrible, awful, terrible thing. And it's so horrible that the Biden administration is allowing this. What an awful massage, right? So they're drumming up this whole drama over the trans athlete thing, which is such a just in terms of the totem pole of potential gendered issues to bitch about. It's exactly what you're talking about earlier. You know, these are just our luxury heavy gray sensations trying to, what is it? It's just nothing but white noise. They're trying to just turn it into problems out of nothing, right? This is the
Yeah,
thing
like
that's
just it doesn't come from me. It comes from a Coltane video. He's like a high IQ MGTOW YouTuber. He
Oh yeah,
made
Coltane's
this,
great. I haven't gotten caught up on his content though.
yeah, but he talked about this analogy where you can train a machine learning algorithm to try to find patterns in images with all sorts of interesting, like hilarious consequences of that. But you can even do something where like you show it just white noise, and it just turns into a complete clusterfuck mishmash of basically visual nonsense of like a psychedelic, random, like very busy sort of imagery, colorful imagery. Basically just seeing things that aren't there, hallucinating. And this is like analogous to feminist gravy train, where they just take things that nobody cared about 10 years because there are no real threats to women's security. They just take things that were not considered systemic issues 20 years ago or 10 years ago, and then they just decide this is going to be a thing now. This is going to be the new systemic thing
Yep.
to talk about.
So yeah, that's what she was doing, right? That was the whole tone of the whole thing, right? Which is, I guess, fine. You want to talk about this specific issue? It's newsworthy, it's topical, right? But God, then she gets so dramatic, right? She's talking about, and really, this thing that's happening to our girls in athletics, this is a part of a long-standing pattern of hatred. It's the same hatred that we've been experiencing that caused us to not be able to vote 100 years ago, right? That's literally what she said. She says, this is caused by misogyny, and misogyny is the same reason we couldn't vote. Right? She just boom, 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 like the most ridiculous hyperbolic combo, right? Yeah, so I'm sitting there like, bitch, you got hate. Your people you're interviewing are committing a hate speech. Okay, like not that I care about that, but But if you're gonna bitch about schlubbery in your comments, like how about the schlubbery that like you are, I guess, tacitly endorsing on your channel? No pushback whatsoever, right? And yeah, it goes back to what you're saying. Like you can conceive of, maybe not an excuse, but at least a plausible reason why someone like Shu or Hunter Avalon, go their way or take a step back or whatever. But with Boyce, it's much more difficult to kind of think of that. I guess maybe he is just kind of a really, really nice guy. So maybe he is just that averse to a heated conversation. But
I find that very hard to believe, given that like he's associated with TERFs and stuff, who seem to be pretty au fait with heated conversation, to say the least. Like from what I've seen of them on Twitter, anyway.
oh yeah, and Parker Posey didn't pull any punches. And
Yeah, Posey Parker.
Oh
her,
yeah. Oh, and she's got so many great insights.
And she's the kind of person who would say, just using the same kind of rhetoric. There was a person on Twitter who suggested that, not him alone, obviously, a lot of people have said this, that the increase in adolescent girls identifying as transsexual males, female to male transsexuals, is because of anti-female messaging and propaganda in the education system. And apparently people actually take this seriously.
Yeah, well, because the premise included women or girls being hurt, and therefore the whole thing's true.
Yeah, it seems to be just, well, the interesting thing about it is why specifically teenage girls and not teenage boys. Because the thing is, you can chalk it up to, like, being trans is, like, a trendy thing or
Yeah, it's
something
peer
that...
pressure. They came out and they're like, oh yeah, it seems to run in cliques of girls, and it's like, huh, that's kind of exactly the way it would be if it were fake. Imagine that.
Yeah, but males also experience social pressure and live in the same culture. So it's just interesting that there's no equivalent increase in teenage boys doing this.
Yeah, I guess we have to get those Discord femboy trap numbers up, I guess. If we're serious about equality.
Maybe it's the case that the teenage girls are just more susceptible to social contagion and like more neurotic as well, which is probably a contributing factor.
I mean, that would be Occam's razor, right? But did you hear Vosh on a stream? He'd hit a whole spiel about how it's wrong that people are sexualizing femboys. And it basically makes this whole case about how the sexualization of femboys is just like another form of when people sexually objectify women, right?
No, you know what's interesting, and I have to say, like, hilarious, is that the establishment are censoring, to a certain extent, leftists who have serious critiques of their regime. So obviously I don't agree with them, but there are, for instance, like hardcore Marxists who have Marxist critiques basically of the establishment and of neoliberalism, and all those Antifa accounts that were suspended because presumably the person who was funding them decided that they were no longer of use. the billionaire technocrat working behind the scenes who was funding them, whoever it was, decided that they were no longer fit for purpose. So
Well,
they
and
were
that was
dispatched.
predicted, right? Many people all called that, right? They said
Yeah,
as soon as
but
they regain political power, they're going to shut down the military wing of the government.
yeah. But what's interesting about these YouTubers is 괰ᴀᴇᴍ, who has a large channel and has like I mean, if you're gonna watch him, it's like be prepared for like the usual shtick and like the really annoying fake like effeminate soy boy mannerisms.
Oh, I'm familiar with him. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think you're
but
being a little unfair, but
but
I
his
appreciate
channel
it.
his channel is being throttled by the algorithm, and he gets very few views, despite the fact that he has a channel with over 100,000 subscribers. I think because he creates serious critiques to the regime from a left-wing perspective. But this is not true of 괡ᴇᴇ. 괡ᴇᴇ gets lots of views, unlike 괰ᴀᴇᴑ, and mainstream media attention, like there've been articles written about him and so forth. And this is hilarious because it tells you everything you need to know about who the establishment considers to be a threat to their power, and they don't consider 괡ᴇᴇ to be a threat to them at all.
Yeah, color me shocked. Although he is nominally opposed to them, right? Just
What?
like all the Sanders supporters are all nominally opposed to the government establishment.
Well, I'm not even talking about his ideology per se. I'm just
Oh,
saying
just the numbers, yeah.
I'm saying that he's really dumb, so they don't perceive him as any threat because he's really dumb.
Yeah. Yeah, he's the new standard. Well, because Kraut disappeared and you needed a new standard, and then, the sky parted and out came 괡ᴇᴇ. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this stream. I'll schedule the next one for around this time. And
Nice. I'm gonna read through the Rats of Nationalism in full again. I'm about 20 pages in because it is very short. It's like a pamphlet, basically.
yeah, it's very short, so I'll make sure I read it through, maybe even a couple times, because it is pretty quick.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm
Well,
gonna have to head off.
everybody, thanks for dropping by. And then I just have to click the end buttons in the right order.